Hello, everyone, and welcome back to X-Ranger. Before we begin, I thought it would be interesting if each of you could leave a comment indicating which part of the world you're joining us from. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the episodes. Now let's get comfortable, relax, and start our program. That day had been pretty ordinary. I remember it was a Friday in late October because the leaves were all turning and the air had that crisp, cold bite to it that makes you want to stay inside. We'd spent the evening like we always do, watching some TV, my wife knitting on the couch, me just lounging around after a long week at work. I work as a mechanic in town, so my days are usually greasy and tired, and by nightfall, I'm ready to crash. We'd had dinner, cleaned up, and around 10 o'clock we decided to head to bed. Nothing out of the ordinary at all. Our bedroom is on the first floor, with a big window that looks out into the backyard. It's one of those old windows with a screen, the kind that's been there forever, and has a few tiny holes from where bugs have gotten through over the years. We never bothered replacing it because, well, why would we? It's not like we get many visitors out here, human or otherwise. That night, I remember pulling the curtains shut most of the way, but not all the way, because I like to see a little bit of the moonlight when I wake up. My wife had already gotten into bed on her side, and I climbed in next to her, pulling the blankets up to my chin. The room was dark except for the faint glow from the digital clock on the nightstand. It read 10:45. I was just starting to drift off, that hazy feeling where your thoughts get all fuzzy, when my wife whispered my name, not loud but urgent, like she was trying not to make any noise. "Hey," she said, her voice barely above a breath. "There's something outside the window." At first, I thought she was dreaming, or maybe hearing a raccoon or something. We get those all the time, little critters scratching around at night. But then I felt her hand on my arm, gripping it tight, and I knew it was real. I sat up slowly, my heart already starting to pound. The room was quiet, but I could hear my own breathing a little too fast. "What is it?" I whispered back, my voice cracking a bit. She didn't answer, just pointed toward the window. I squinted in the dark, trying to see what she was talking about. At first, I didn't see anything. Just the outline of the trees against the night sky and the faint shimmer of the screen. But then I noticed it, a weird, faint orange glow coming from outside, right up against the window. My first thought was maybe a neighbor with a flashlight, but we don't have close neighbors. The nearest house is half a mile down the road, and nobody comes out here at night. I reached over and fumbled for the lamp on my nightstand, my fingers shaking a little. I clicked it on, and the room flooded with light, making me blink. That's when I saw them. Pressed against the screen were 3 sets of eyes. They were glowing this faint orange color, like embers from a fire, and they were spaced about 5 to 8 inches apart. I could see the screen dimpling where they were pushed up against it, like whatever was out there was leaning in close. The eyes weren't blinking or moving. They were just staring right at us. But the craziest part was the figure I could make out behind them. One of them was stooping down to look through the top of the window, and even from inside, I could tell it was tall, like 6 feet off the ground tall. The way it was hunched over, it had to be big, really big, to be that high up while bending down. I froze. I mean, completely froze. My brain was trying to process what I was seeing, but it didn't make any sense. They weren't animal eyes. Deer eyes glow green or white in the light, and these were orange, and they were too close together for a bear or something, and they were on 2 legs. I could tell that much from the shape. My wife was gripping my arm so hard it hurt, and I could feel her trembling next to me. The air in the room felt cold, like all the warmth had been sucked out, and I had this chill running down my spine. We just stared at each other, me and those eyes, for what felt like forever but was probably only a few seconds. Then, out of nowhere, this sound ripped through the silence. It was a scream, but not like any scream I've ever heard. It was loud, so loud it felt like it was inside my head, and it had two parts to it. First, a high-pitched shriek that made my ears ring, then a lower, guttural roar that vibrated right through my chest. I swear I felt it in my bones. The sound echoed around the room, and for a second I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. As soon as the scream ended, the eyes vanished. I saw the figures, all three of them, turn and run off into the darkness. They moved on two legs, fast and smooth, like they were built for it, and they disappeared into the trees behind our house in seconds. The screen where they'd been pressed against was still vibrating a little, and I could see the faint imprint of where their faces had been. For a long moment, neither of us moved. I was still sitting up in bed, my heart hammering against my ribs, and my wife was clutching the blankets, her face pale. The room was quiet again, but now the silence felt heavy, oppressive. I could hear the wind outside, but it sounded different, like it was carrying something with it. My hands were shaking, and I had to force myself to take a deep breath. "What was that?" my wife whispered, her voice trembling. I didn't have an answer. I just shook my head, still staring at the window. The orange glow was gone, but I could still see it in my mind, those eyes burning into me. I got out of bed slowly, my legs feeling like jelly, and walked over to the window. I didn't want to, but I had to see. I peered out into the darkness, but there was nothing there, just the trees swaying in the wind, and the moon casting long shadows. The yard was empty. I reached out and touched the screen. It was cold, and where the eyes had been, it felt slightly damp, like from breath or something. I pulled my hand back fast, like I'd been burned. My wife got up too, and we both stood there for a minute, just looking out. Neither of us said anything. We didn't need to. I could feel the fear hanging in the air between us. We decided to check the house, make sure everything was locked up. I grabbed a flashlight from the kitchen, my hands still unsteady, and we went room by room, checking windows and doors. Everything was secure, but it didn't make me feel any better. Every little sound, the creak of the floorboards, the hum of the fridge, made me jump. My wife stayed close to me, her arm linked through mine, and I could feel her shivering. After we'd checked everything, we went back to the bedroom, but there was no way we were going to sleep. We sat on the edge of the bed, just staring at the window. I kept expecting to see those eyes again, but nothing happened. The clock ticked over to 11:30, then midnight, and the night dragged on. I remember feeling so exposed, like the walls of the house weren't enough to protect us. We've lived here for 12 years, and I've never felt unsafe. But that night, I felt vulnerable in a way I can't describe. My mind kept going back to what I saw. Those eyes, they weren't human, but they weren't animal either. The spacing between them, about 5 to 8 inches, meant whatever it was had a broad face. And the one stooping down had to be huge to be 6 feet up while bending. And the scream, it was unlike anything I've ever heard. I've heard coyotes, bobcats, even a mountain lion once, but this was different. It was intelligent almost, like it was meant to scare us, and it worked. We didn't talk much that night. Every now and then, one of us would say something like, "Did you hear that?" But it was always nothing. The fear had settled deep inside me, a cold knot in my stomach. I kept replaying the moment in my head, the whisper, the light turning on, those eyes, the scream. It all happened so fast, but it felt like it lasted forever. As the hours passed, the sky started to lighten, and eventually the sun came up. With the daylight, some of the fear faded, but not all of it. We went outside to look around, but there wasn't much to see. The ground was soft from recent rain, but we didn't find any footprints. Nothing clear anyway, just some disturbed leaves near the window, like something had been standing there. We didn't call the police or anything. What would we say? We saw big, glowing-eyed things outside our window? They'd think we were crazy. We've never seen them again, not in all the years since. But that night changed everything. Now, every time I hear a noise outside, my heart skips a beat. I keep the curtains shut tight at night, and I installed motion sensor lights around the house, though they've never picked up anything unusual. My wife still gets jumpy if we're outside after dark, and sometimes I catch her staring out the window like she's expecting to see something. I don't know what they were. Bigfoot? Some kind of creature? I've read stories online, accounts from other people who've seen similar things, and it sounds familiar. The glowing eyes, the screams, the way they move on two legs. But reading about it isn't the same as living it. That night, I felt a kind of primal fear I didn't know was possible. It's been years now, but I still wake up sometimes in the middle of the night, sweating, thinking I hear that scream again. And every time I look out that window, I can't help but remember those orange eyes staring back at me. And I wonder if they're still out there, watching. Story 2. Okay, so I've never really posted anything like this before, but I need to get this out there because it's been eating at me for years. I'm just a regular guy, worked a normal job in Fairbanks, Alaska, and nothing too wild ever happened to me until that day in July 2009. I still remember it like it was yesterday, and every time I drive down that road, my stomach knots up. I'm not looking for attention or anything. I just want to share what happened because I know I'm not crazy, and maybe someone else has seen something similar. It was a Tuesday, I think, because I'd just finished a shift at work and was heading home. The sun was starting to dip, but it was still light out, that kind of hazy late afternoon where everything feels calm and quiet. I was driving my old pickup truck along Auburn Drive, which is this winding road near Pearl Creek Elementary School. The area's mostly woods on either side, thick with spruce and birch trees, and in the summer, it's so green it almost feels like a tunnel. I had the window down because the air was cool and fresh, and I was just zoning out, thinking about what to make for dinner and whether I needed to stop for groceries. You know, normal stuff. As I came around a bend, I spotted something on the side of the road up ahead. At first, I thought it was a person, maybe a hiker or someone who'd broken down. It was standing kind of slumped, but upright, and I figured it was just someone looking at their phone or something. I didn't think much of it. I slowed down a bit because you always do when you see someone on foot out there, just in case. But as I got closer, within maybe 50 yards, my brain started screaming that something was off. This wasn't a person. It was tall, really tall, like 6 feet or more, and it was covered in this rusty red hair that looked matted and thick, almost like fur. It didn't have clothes on, and its body was lean but muscular, with long arms that hung down past its knees. I know that sounds crazy, but that's what I saw. Then, before I could process it, the thing moved. It didn't run like a human. It kind of hopped. But in a way I've never seen anything move before. Its legs bent weirdly, and it bolted into the trees with this jerky, upright gait that was both fast and unnatural. Like it wasn't graceful. It was almost clumsy, but it covered ground so quickly that my eyes could barely keep up. My heart just dropped into my stomach. I slammed on the brakes, and the truck skidded to a stop on the gravel shoulder. I was gripping the steering wheel so hard, my knuckles turned white, and I could feel my pulse thumping in my throat. For a second, I just sat there, frozen, staring at the spot where it had disappeared. But I couldn't look away. The creature didn't go deep into the woods right away. It moved parallel to the road, staying just inside the tree line. I could see it through the gaps in the branches, that red hair standing out against the green. It was running, but not on all fours. It was on 2 legs, and its body swayed with each hop, like it was bouncing rather than stepping. The sound it made was this rustling, crunching noise, but louder than a deer or anything I'd heard before, almost like it was tearing through the underbrush without caring. I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead, and my breathing got shallow. Part of me wanted to drive away as fast as I could, but another part was just fascinated, terrified, but curious. I had to see where it was going. I kept the engine running and slowly rolled forward, matching its pace. It was maybe 20 yards away, and I could see more details now. The hair wasn't uniform. It was patchy in places, and I caught a glimpse of its face. It didn't look human at all. No distinct features, just kind of a flat, dark area where eyes should be, and its head seemed too small for its body. It never looked back at me, just kept moving with that weird, hopping run, and I remember thinking how alien it felt. This wasn't a bear or a moose. I've seen plenty of those around here, and they don't move like that. Bears lope, moose amble, but this thing was like a puppet on strings, all jerky and fast. After a minute or so, it veered deeper into the woods, and I lost sight of it. The trees swallowed it up, and everything went quiet again, except for the hum of my truck's engine. I sat there for what felt like forever, my hands shaking so bad I had to clench them to stop. I knew I had to do something, so I decided to try and get ahead of it. There's a loop you can take through the school parking lot that circles back to the same area, so I hit the gas and sped down the road. My mind was racing. What if it was still there? What if it came out onto the road again? I was scared, but I also needed to prove to myself that I wasn't hallucinating. I pulled into the Pearl Creek Elementary parking lot, which was empty since school was out for the summer. The lot is paved, but kind of cracked, and it backs right up to the same dense woods. I parked near the edge, turned off the engine, and just listened. Nothing. No birds, no wind, just silence. It was eerie, like the whole forest was holding its breath. I got out of the truck slowly, my legs feeling wobbly, and walked toward the tree line. The air was cool, but I was sweating under my jacket. I peered into the woods, trying to see any movement, but it was too thick. The shadows were getting longer as the sun dipped lower, and every little rustle made me jump. I stood there for maybe 10 minutes, scanning the trees, but I didn't see anything. No red hair, no strange movements. I even called out, "Hello?" But my voice sounded small and stupid in the quiet. No response. I thought about venturing in, but something stopped me, a gut feeling that it wasn't safe. The memory of that thing's movement, that hopping gait, sent chills down my spine. It was like my body knew better than to go in there, so I got back in my truck and just sat staring at the woods. My heart was still pounding, and I could feel this dread building in my chest. What had I just seen? Was it some kind of animal? But it didn't move like any animal I knew. I ended up driving home in a daze, taking the long way just to avoid that stretch of road. The whole time, I kept replaying it in my head, the way it darted into the trees, that unnatural run. When I got home, I couldn't settle down. I kept looking out the windows, half expecting to see it in my yard. I didn't sleep much that night. Every noise had me bolting upright, and I'd lie there with my heart hammering, thinking about that rusty red hair and how fast it moved. The next day, I talked to some locals at a gas station, and one guy mentioned that kids had been talking about an ass-catch in the area. I'd never heard that word before, but he said it was some kind of creature from local stories, like a Bigfoot or something. That just cemented it for me. I wasn't the only one who'd seen something. I called the Alaska Department of Fish and Game in Fairbanks, but the guy who answered sounded bored. He took notes on what sounded like scrap paper and said they'd look into it, but I never heard back. It made me feel dismissed, like I was some nut job, but I know what I saw. That experience changed me. I'm more cautious now when I'm out in the woods, and I always keep an eye on the tree line. The terror of that moment, seeing it bolt away with that alien movement, haunts me. I've never seen it again, but I know it was real. Sometimes when I'm driving home at dusk, I'll catch a shadow moving in the trees, and my breath catches. I'll always wonder what it was and why it was there, but I guess I'll never know. It's just one of those things that stays with you, leaving you unsettled and forever looking over your shoulder. Story 3. It was still dark that morning, just after 5 o'clock, and I was already an hour into my drive. My coffee was gone, just a cold, bitter smear at the bottom of the thermos, and the only thing keeping me company was the hum of my old Ford Ranger's tires on the asphalt of Highway 53. This was my regular commute, 5 days a week, heading north towards Jacksonville. You get used to the routine, you know. Your brain goes on autopilot. You're not really looking at the trees and the swamps that crowd right up against the road. You're just seeing the lane lines, watching for deer. August 15th, 2011. I remember the date because it was a Monday, and I always hate Mondays. The air was thick and warm even that early, the kind of wet heat that clings to your skin. My headlights cut 2 lonely tunnels through the absolute blackness, because out there, away from the towns, there are no streetlights. It's just you and the dark. I was doing 50, maybe 55, on a dead straight stretch a few miles past the Sandy Run swamp area. The forest on my right was a solid wall of shadow, and on the left, the land dipped away into that same inky nothingness. I had the radio on low, some classic rock station playing a song I can't even remember now. My mind was already at work, thinking about the paperwork waiting for me. Then something moved. It came from the right, from the tree line, and it exploded into my headlights. It was less than 50 feet in front of the truck, and my brain just froze for a second, trying to process what I was seeing. This wasn't a deer. A deer is all legs and grace, a bouncing fluid motion. This thing was upright. It was running on 2 legs, a full, powerful sprint, like a man. But it wasn't a man. It was huge. I'd guess 6.5, 7 feet tall, and built like a powerlifter. Thick, ropey muscles bulged under a coat of hair that was this weird, rusty brown color, like old dried blood mixed with dirt. It was matted, clumped in places, like it had been wallowing in mud. The arms were crazy long, swinging with its gait, and I saw the hands. That's the part that stuck with me the most, I think. They were almost human hands, but bigger, brutish, and as it pumped its arms, the headlights caught the fingernails. They were thick and black, like chips of obsidian. It never looked at me. Its head was down, focused on getting across the road, and it covered the 2 lanes in 4 massive ground-eating strides. The power in that movement was terrifying. It wasn't just fast, it was strong. Each footfall seemed to slam into the pavement. I swear I could feel the thud through my truck's frame. My foot slammed the brake pedal before my brain even caught up. The truck shuddered, the anti-lock brakes chattering, and I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles went white. It was already gone, vanishing into the swamp on the left side of the road, swallowed by the darkness in a heartbeat. The whole thing, from the moment it entered the light to the moment it disappeared, lasted maybe 2 seconds, 3 tops. I sat there, stopped in the middle of the highway, my heart trying to punch its way out of my chest. I was breathing in these ragged, shallow gasps. I just stared into the blackness where it had gone, expecting it to come back, expecting to see 2 glowing eyes staring back at me. But there was nothing, just the silent, oppressive dark. That's when the headlights from behind lit up my cab. I looked in the rear view and saw a car that had come up behind me. It swerved around me, braking hard, and sped off. I remember the driver, just a blur of a face, looking over at me with this pissed-off, confused expression. He must have thought I was some drunk or idiot who'd stopped for no reason. He didn't see it. He had no idea what had just run in front of us. I sat there for another minute, maybe 2, my hands shaking so bad I had to clasp them together. I kept telling myself it was a bear standing on its hind legs. But I've seen bears, I've hunted my whole life. That wasn't a bear's gait. Bears on 2 legs are clumsy, waddling. This thing was a runner. And the hands, bears have paws, not hands with fingers and black fingernails. The proportions were all wrong. The arms were too long, the shoulders too massive. Eventually, the primal part of my brain that was screaming, "Move, get out of here," won out over the part that was frozen in shock. I put the truck in drive and eased forward, my eyes glued to the left side ditch. I drove the rest of the way to work in a complete daze. I didn't turn the radio back on. The only sound was the thumping of my own heart in my ears. The workday was a blur. I couldn't concentrate. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that rusty brown figure, the powerful swing of its arms, the way it moved with such purpose. I told one guy, Mike, in the break room, I said, "You ain't gonna believe what I saw this morning." I described it, and he just laughed and said, "Dude, you need more sleep. It was a big old bear." I didn't bring it up again. What was the point? The drive home was worse. The sun was up, but now every shadow in the trees looked like a hiding place. I white-knuckled it the whole way, my foot hovering over the brake, expecting it to burst out again. When I finally pulled into my driveway, a quarter-mile dirt track off a smaller county road, I felt a wave of relief. Home. Safety. That feeling lasted about 10 minutes. I have a decent-sized piece of property, a couple of acres, mostly woods with a cleared area around my single-wide trailer. The first thing I noticed was my dog, Buddy. Buddy's a rat terrier, 12 pounds of pure noise and courage. He usually comes barreling out from under the porch, yapping his head off, spinning in circles the second he hears my truck. This time there was nothing, no sound. I got out and called for him. "Buddy, come here, boy." A low, terrified whine came from underneath the trailer. I got down on my hands and knees and peered into the dark crawl space. I could just make out his little shape pressed flat against the ground in the farthest, darkest corner. His eyes were wide, showing white all around, and a continuous guttural growl rumbled in his chest. He wouldn't come out. I tried coaxing him with a treat, but he just tucked his head down and whined louder. He was absolutely terrified. That wasn't like him. Not at all. A possum would send him into a frenzy. This was a different kind of fear, a primal one. Puzzled, and now with a fresh knot of anxiety in my gut, I stood up and looked around. That's when I saw the garden. I'd spent the previous weekend building up 2 big mulch piles from shredded leaves and pine straw, each about 4 feet high. They were torn apart, not just scattered but violently dismantled. It looked like someone had taken a rake and just hacked at them, throwing mulch everywhere in great arcing sprays. In the middle of the mess, I saw what was left of a few watermelons I had growing. They weren't just eaten, they were obliterated, smashed. Pink pulp and black seeds were ground into the dirt, and there were fish. I'd cleaned some catfish the night before and thrown the heads and guts into the woods for the raccoons. Those remains were dragged right into the middle of my garden. They'd been picked clean, the spines cracked open for the marrow. My mouth went dry. I walked over, my boots crunching on the scattered pine straw, and that's when I saw the footprints. They were pressed deep into the soft, damp earth at the edge of the garden, right where the woods start. They were huge. I wear a size 12 boot, and I placed my foot next to one. It was a good 6 inches longer and twice as wide. The print was human-shaped, but the toes were splayed wide, and the arch was flat. The stride. I followed them with my eyes. The distance between one print and the next was enormous. It wasn't a human stride. It was a loping, powerful gait, the kind a giant would make. The tracks came out of the woods, went straight to the mulch piles and the fish remains, and then headed around towards the back of my trailer. I felt cold all over. This wasn't a coincidence. This wasn't a bear. A bear doesn't make footprints that look like a naked human foot, just scaled up to nightmare size. I went inside, my heart back to its frantic hammering. I locked the door, something I almost never do out here. I tried to act normal, make some dinner, but I just stood in my kitchen, staring out the window at the darkening tree line. Every little sound, the creak of the trailer settling, the hum of the refrigerator, made me jump. Buddy finally slunk inside when I opened the door, but he wouldn't leave my side, pressed up against my legs, trembling. Night fell. The woods around my place became a solid mass of black. I had all the lights on inside, which just turned my windows into mirrors, so I turned them off, sitting in the dark, feeling more exposed than ever. I was just sitting on my couch, trying to watch TV, but not absorbing anything, just listening. That's when it happened. A heavy, solid thump hit the side of my trailer. The whole structure shook. It wasn't a bump from an animal. It was an impact. It felt like someone had taken a sledgehammer to the aluminum siding. Buddy, who was curled on the couch next to me, let out a sharp yelp and then dove underneath it, shivering uncontrollably. I froze. My blood turned to ice water. I couldn't move. I just sat there, straining to hear, my ears ringing in the silence that followed. I didn't hear any footsteps. No grunting. Nothing. Just that one massive, deliberate impact. After what felt like an eternity, I forced myself to move. I crept to the window next to the door and carefully peeled back the corner of the blinds. My porch light was on, casting a weak yellow glow on the front yard. I didn't see anything, no movement, no shape in the darkness. It took me another 10 minutes to work up the courage to open the door. I had my shotgun in my hands, the weight of it both comforting and terrifying. I stepped out onto the porch, the wooden boards creaking under my feet. The night air was dead still and silent, eerily silent. No crickets, no frogs from the nearby pond, nothing. I swept the flashlight beam around the yard. Nothing. I walked around to the side of the trailer where the sound had come from. At first, I didn't see anything out of the ordinary. Then my light fell on the 5-gallon plastic barrel I keep by my rain gutter to collect water for the garden. It was moved. I always keep it right under the downspout. It was now 5 feet away, lying on its side, and it was empty. The lid, which snaps on tight, was off and lying a few feet away. The barrel hadn't just been knocked over, it had been picked up, the lid removed, the water poured out or drunk, and then tossed aside. I stood there, my flashlight beam trembling on the empty barrel. The feeling of being watched was so intense, it was a physical pressure on the back of my neck. My skin was crawling. I quickly backed towards my front door, my head on a swivel, scanning the tree line. I saw nothing, just endless, watching darkness. I got back inside, locked the door, and leaned against it, breathing hard. I was safe for now. I stayed like that for a long time, just listening, and then I heard it. From the northwest, deep in the woods that back up to my property, a sound cut through the silence. It wasn't a scream, it wasn't a roar, it was a howl. But unlike any coyote or dog I've ever heard, it was lower, deeper, a long, drawn-out vocalization that started as a guttural growl and rose into this high, piercing note that seemed to vibrate in my bones. It held that note for what felt like forever, a sound of pure, wild loneliness and power. And then it faded away, leaving the silence feeling even heavier and more menacing than before. In the days that followed, I realized the woods were empty. The family of deer that always grazed at the edge of my property in the evening were gone. The raccoons that used to raid my trash cans were nowhere to be seen. It was like every living thing had gotten the memo to clear out. I never saw the thing again. I never found any more tracks after that night, but I know what I saw on the highway. I know what tore up my garden. I know what hit my trailer and emptied that barrel, and I know that howl. It's been years now. I still live in the same place. Buddy eventually got back to normal, though he still sometimes gets spooked for no reason I can see and stares into the woods. I see the deer again. The raccoons are back, but I never drive down Highway 53 before the sun comes up anymore. I leave for work later, and every single night without fail, I lock my door. I look out at the dark trees and I listen. And I wonder if it's still out there, and if it remembers me. Story 4. I'd been on the road for a couple of hours, coming back from a friend's place in Vale. I was tired, my eyes were starting to feel heavy, and I had the heat cranked up just to keep myself awake. The radio was on low, some classic rock station fading in and out, but I wasn't really listening. My mind was wandering, thinking about work the next day, how I needed to get home and crash. The drive is usually pretty straightforward, but that night it felt longer, more isolated. There weren't many other cars out, just the occasional truck or someone else dumb enough to be driving late after a snowfall. The air outside was freezing. I could feel the cold seeping through the windows, even with the heater going. My breath was making little clouds inside the car, and I kept wiping the fog off the windshield with my sleeve. As I rounded this sharp curve, the one that follows the Colorado River for a bit, my headlights swept across the scene ahead. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. There were two figures, right in the middle of the river, walking upright. The river was mostly frozen along the edges, but in the center you could see dark, choppy water moving fast. It was insane. Who the hell would be out there in the middle of the night, in below freezing temperatures, wading through a river? My first thought was that they were stranded, maybe hikers who got lost or something. My heart started pounding, not out of fear yet, but out of this urgent need to help. I've always been the kind of person who stops if someone looks like they're in trouble, so without even thinking, I pulled over onto the shoulder, my tires crunching on the packed snow. I remember getting out of the car, and the cold hit me like a wall. It was biting, the kind of cold that makes your skin ache instantly. I zipped up my jacket, pulled my hood up, and started walking toward the riverbank. The snow was deep, up to my knees in some spots, and it was slow going. I could hear the river rushing, this constant roaring sound that seemed to drown out everything else. The moonlight made the snow sparkle, but it also cast long, distorted shadows, making everything look twisted and unnatural. As I got closer, I could see the figures more clearly. They were about 50 yards out, moving downstream, and they were walking like humans. But something was off. Their arms were too long, dangling almost to their knees, and their posture was hunched, like they were carrying a heavy weight. I shouted, "Hey, are you okay?" But my voice was swallowed by the noise of the river and the wind. They didn't turn around, didn't even seem to notice me. I started waving my arms, thinking maybe they couldn't hear me over the water. That's when I really focused on what I was seeing. They were covered in what looked like dark, matted fur, but it wasn't like any animal I'd ever seen. It was fuzzy, almost shaggy, and it clung to their bodies in wet clumps. Their shapes were humanoid, but the proportions were all wrong. The legs were too thick, the shoulders too broad, and those arms, God, those arms were so long, swinging loosely as they moved. They weren't struggling against the current either. They were just walking, steady and deliberate, like they were on solid ground. My brain was trying to make sense of it. Maybe they were wearing weird costumes, or it was some kind of prank. But who would do that in the middle of a freezing river in the dead of night? I took a few more steps forward, my boots sinking into the snow, and I could feel the icy water seeping through the seams. The cold was numbing my feet, but I was too focused on them to care. I was maybe 30 yards away now, close enough to see details. Their heads were large, and I couldn't make out faces, just dark patches where faces should be. They moved in sync, one after the other, and there was this grace to it that was unsettling. It wasn't human grace, it was too fluid, too effortless. That's when the terror hit me. All at once it dawned on me that no one could survive in that water. The Colorado River is cold even in summer, but in winter, with snowmelt, it's frigid enough to kill you in minutes from hypothermia. And these things, they weren't shivering, weren't slowing down. They were just walking, like it was nothing. My heart started hammering in my chest so hard I could feel it in my throat. My breath came in short, sharp gasps, and the cold air burned my lungs. I felt dizzy, like the ground was tilting under me. This wasn't right. This wasn't possible. I've seen bears, elk, all sorts of wildlife in Colorado, but this was different. This was something else entirely. I froze, just standing there, watching them. My mind raced through explanations. Maybe it was a hallucination from fatigue or the moonlight playing tricks. But no, I was wide awake now, adrenaline coursing through me. I could see the water splashing around their legs, but they didn't seem to feel it. Their movements were too smooth, too coordinated, and then one of them turned its head slightly, and I swear it looked right at me. There were no eyes that I could see, just darkness. But I felt this intense primal fear wash over me. It was like being stared down by a predator, something that saw me as prey. I took a step back, my foot slipping on the icy snow, and I almost fell. That's when I heard the roar of a semi-truck coming up behind me. I'd forgotten I was still on the shoulder of the interstate. I spun around, and the headlights were blinding, bearing down on me fast. I stumbled backward, tripping over a snowdrift, and landed hard on my side. The truck blew past, so close I felt the wind of it, the spray of slush hitting my face. It honked, a long, angry blast that echoed in the silence afterward. For a second, I just lay there, heart pounding, snow soaking into my clothes. The cold was seeping into my bones, and I was shaking uncontrollably. I scrambled to my feet, my mind screaming at me to get back to the car. I glanced back at the river, but the figures were gone. Vanished. Just like that. The river was empty, except for the churning water and the moonlight reflecting off it. I stood there panting, my breath coming out in white plumes. Where did they go? Did they submerge? Keep walking? I didn't know, and I didn't want to know. My hands were trembling so bad I could barely make a fist. I thought about pulling out my phone, maybe trying to take a picture or video, but what would that do? Even if I got something, who would believe me? And more importantly, what if drawing attention to myself brought them back? The fear was too raw, too overwhelming. I just wanted to get out of there. I half ran, half stumbled back to my car, my legs feeling like jelly. When I got in, I locked the doors immediately, like that would do any good. My hands were so cold I could barely grip the steering wheel. I started the engine, turned the heat up full blast, and just sat there for a minute trying to calm down. My whole body was shaking, and I could feel sweat on my forehead despite the cold. I looked in the rearview mirror, but the river was out of sight now, hidden by the curve of the road. Everything was quiet again. Too quiet. The only sound was the hum of the engine and my own ragged breathing. I pulled back onto the interstate, my tires slipping a little on the slush. I drove slower than before, my eyes darting to the sides of the road, half expecting to see those figures again. The snow had started up again, light flakes drifting down, making the world feel even more isolated. My mind kept replaying what I'd seen, the way they moved, the length of their arms, the sheer impossibility of it all. I've had other weird experiences in Colorado, a couple of times where I thought I saw something big and dark moving in the woods, but nothing like this. Those other times, I could almost convince myself it was a bear or a trick of the light. This was undeniable. It was real, and it was terrifying. The rest of the drive home was a blur. I don't remember much, just the white lines on the road and the steady fall of snow. When I finally pulled into my driveway, it was well past midnight. I sat in the car for a long time, just staring at the garage door, not wanting to go inside. The house felt too empty, too quiet. When I did go in, I checked all the locks, closed the curtains, and turned on every light. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, even though I knew it was irrational. I took a hot shower, but the cold felt like it had settled deep inside me. I kept seeing those figures in my mind. Their dark forms against the bright snow, moving through the freezing water like it was nothing. I didn't sleep much that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I'd see them, or hear the rush of the river, or feel that heart-stopping moment when the truck almost hit me. The next day, I called in sick to work. I couldn't focus, couldn't think about anything else. I thought about reporting it to someone, the police or a wildlife agency. But what would I say? I saw 2 Bigfoots walking in the river. They'd think I was crazy. So I kept it to myself, bottled up inside. Over time, the sharp edge of the fear dulled, but it never really went away. I still drive that stretch of I-7 sometimes, and every time I do, my hands grip the wheel tighter, and I avoid looking at the river. I've never seen them again, and part of me hopes I never will, but that night is burned into my memory. It's the most vivid, the most horrifying thing I've ever experienced, and to this day, I have no explanation for what I saw. None at all. Story 5. It was the middle of December back in 2011. I was 16. I remember that specifically because I'd just gotten my learner's permit a couple months before, and I'd been bugging my mum the whole drive to let me take the wheel for a bit. We were coming back from my aunt's place out past Live Oak. It was one of those visits that went on too long, and we ended up leaving way later than we meant to. It was already full dark, the kind of dark you only get out in the sticks in North Florida, where the trees just swallow all the light. The road was this narrow two-lane thing, SR 250, I think. No streetlights, just our headlights cutting a weak tunnel through the pitch black. On either side, it was just a wall of pine trees and scrub oak, thick and endless. My mum was driving, and I was in the passenger seat messing with the radio, trying to find a station that wasn't just static or preaching. The car was this old Honda Accord, beige, and it always smelled faintly of coffee and her perfume. I remember feeling tired and a little bored, just staring out my window at the blackness. You know how you sometimes see things in the shadows at the edge of the headlights? Stumps that look like animals, or mailboxes that look like people for a second. I was used to that, but this was different. I saw movement, deep in the trees, but keeping pace with us. We weren't going slow. My mum had the cruise control set to 45. This thing was just gliding. It wasn't crashing through the undergrowth. It was moving smooth, like it was on a track, effortlessly matching our speed. I sat up a little straighter, squinting. "Mom," I said, my voice quieter than I meant it to be, "do you see that?" She glanced over. "See what, honey? A deer." "Just something in the trees. It's big." She looked back at the road, her hands tightening on the wheel just a bit. We both fell silent, and I kept my eyes glued to the window. For a minute, I didn't see anything, and I started to feel stupid. Maybe it was just a trick of the light. But then it emerged from behind a thicker cluster of pines, and my breath just caught in my throat. It was huge. I'm not talking tall, I'm talking massive. It had to be over 8 feet tall, easy. It was running on 2 legs, upright like a person, but no person moves like that. Its legs were long, and its stride was, I don't know how to describe it, fluid, powerful. It wasn't loping or clumsy. It was smooth like a predator. Its arms were long, too, swinging with a purpose, and its whole body was covered in this shaggy, dark brown hair that was almost black in the gloom. But the worst part was its face. It turned its head just for a second to look at the car. The head was kind of blocky, broad, with a heavy brow, and its eyes. Oh God, its eyes. They caught the light from our car and they glowed, not like a cat's green shine. This was a deep, burning orange red, like embers in a fire. It felt like it was looking right at me, right through the glass and into my soul. It was an intelligent look, not the dumb curiosity of a deer. This was a calculating, territorial stare. "Mom," I whispered, and my voice was shaking now. "Mom, step on it." She saw it then. I heard her gasp, a sharp intake of air. "What in God's name is that?" Her voice was high and thin with fear. The creature didn't slow down. It just kept pace. This gigantic, impossible thing sprinting through the woods like it was nothing. The trees were maybe 30, 40 feet from the road, and it was staying just inside the tree line, but it felt so close. I could see the powerful muscles in its legs and shoulders working. I could see the way its hair rippled as it moved. Then it veered. It didn't slow or change its gait. It just angled out of the trees and onto the shoulder of the road. The shoulder was just gravel and dirt, and its feet, I couldn't see its feet clearly, but they must have been huge, kicked up little puffs of dust. It was still keeping up with us, but now it was right there in the open, just a few yards away from my window. I think I was crying. I know my hands were gripping the sides of my seat, my knuckles white. I couldn't look away. It was like a car crash happening in slow motion. My mum was just repeating, oh my God," under her breath, her foot pressing harder on the accelerator. The car engine whined, and we started to pick up speed. 50, 55. And this monster, it just matched us, effortlessly. Its legs pumped, its arms swung, and it kept right alongside us. It wasn't even breathing hard, at least not that I could hear over the sound of the car and my own pounding heart. Then it looked at the car again. Those red-orange eyes locked onto me for a split second, and then it angled its body. It darted towards us. It happened so fast. 1 second it was on the shoulder, the next it was lunging across the lane. It didn't run in front of us. It came at the side of the car, from my side. I screamed and flinched back, throwing my arms up over my face. The impact wasn't a crash. It was a heavy, solid thump that came from the rear of the car. It felt like we'd hit a pothole, but 100 times worse. The whole car shuddered, a violent, jarring shake that rattled my teeth. The back end fishtailed for a terrifying second, and my mum let out a full-blown scream, fighting the wheel to keep us on the road. Go, go, go! I was shrieking now, pure, unfiltered terror taking over. My mum slammed her foot all the way to the floor. The old Honda surged forward, the engine roaring. I twisted in my seat, looking out the back window, expecting to see it right there, clawing at the glass. For a moment, I saw nothing but darkness. Then, just at the very edge of our taillights, I saw it. It had stopped in the middle of the road. It was standing there, upright, watching us flee. It was just a massive, dark silhouette now, but I could still make out its shape, and I could still see those 2 pinpricks of hellish light burning in the night. It didn't chase us. It just stood there, as if it had made its point. We didn't slow down for what felt like an eternity. My mom was sobbing and driving, her whole body trembling. I was trembling too, shaking so hard I felt like I was going to be sick. We must have driven 10 miles before either of us could speak. We have to stop, my mum finally said, her voice ragged. I have to see what it did. I didn't want to stop. I wanted to drive all the way to the coast and never look back. But she was right. We pulled over at a gas station that was all lit up, a beacon of normalcy in the insane night. The parking lot was bright, and there were a couple of truckers filling up. It felt safe, or at least safer. We got out, our legs wobbly. The cold night air hit me, and I realized I was drenched in a cold sweat. We walked to the back of the car, and there it was. On the trunk lid, on the driver's side corner, was a dent. It wasn't a huge crater, but it was deep and obvious. And in the middle of the dent, pressed into the metal, was a handprint. My stomach dropped. It wasn't a human handprint. It was huge, wider than my mum's hand splayed out. You could see the impression of the palm, broad and thick, and the fingers. The fingers were long, and they seemed wrong, like they were too long, or the proportions were off. It was unmistakable. Something had put its hand on our car and shoved. Below the dent, there were scratches. 4 parallel grooves dug right into the paint, down to the bare metal. They were deep and smeared around the dent, and the scratches was this residue. It was dark, almost black, and it had a smell, a musky, pungent odor, like wet dog and old leaves and something else, something wild and foul that I'd never smelled before. It made my nose wrinkle. We just stood there, staring at it. The evidence was right there. We hadn't imagined it. This thing, whatever it was, had physically touched our car. It had left its mark. My mum pulled out her cell phone, one of those old flip phones, and her hands were shaking so bad she could barely dial. She called the non-emergency number for the sheriff's office. I heard her talking, her voice breaking as she tried to explain. She said we'd been attacked by some kind of animal on the road. She didn't say what we saw. How could she? They sent a wildlife officer out to the gas station to meet us. He was a nice enough guy, maybe in his 40s, wearing a uniform. He looked tired. He listened to our story, and I could see the skepticism on his face the moment my mom got to the part about it running on 2 legs and being over 8 feet tall. He took notes. He looked at the dent and the scratches. He sniffed the residue and his expression changed for a second, a flicker of something, confusion, maybe recognition. But then it was gone. He took a sample of the gunk with a swab. He took pictures of the damage, but then he just kind of shrugged. He said it was probably a bear, a black bear standing on its hind legs. Maybe got spooked by the car. I wanted to scream. A bear? A bear doesn't run at 45 miles per hour, keeping pace with a car. A bear doesn't have glowing red eyes. A bear doesn't leave a handprint like that. But I didn't say anything. I was just a scared kid. What did I know? He filed a report, he said. We never heard anything back. We drove the rest of the way home in total silence, both of us jumping at every shadow, every shape on the side of the road. We didn't get the dent fixed for months. Every time I saw it, my heart would start hammering all over again. That was over a decade ago. I'm an adult now. I have a job, an apartment, a normal life. But I've never forgotten. The memory of that thing is burned into my brain. The way it moved, that smooth gliding run that defied physics. The sheer raw power in its body, the intelligent territorial glare in those orange-red eyes right before it slammed into us. I don't drive on dark wooded roads at night anymore if I can help it. I get this tightness in my chest, this primal fear that starts humming in the back of my skull, because I know what's out there. Maybe not everywhere, but in those deep woods of northern Florida, there's something big and fast and strong, something that doesn't like cars getting too close to its territory, something that wanted us to know it was there. And sometimes, in my nightmares, I'm back in that car. I'm looking out the window, and it's there, running, and it turns its head, and those eyes find mine, and I know with a certainty that chills me to the bone that it remembers me too. Story 6. I still think about it all the time, even though it was so long ago, back in 1977. I was just a kid, 6 or 7 years old, and my younger sister was maybe 4 or 5. We lived in this old house out in the country, surrounded by woods, and it was the kind of place where you could go days without seeing another soul. That day sticks in my mind like a splinter you can't dig out, and I've never been able to shake it. It was a late afternoon in fall, I think, because I remember the leaves were starting to turn, and the air had that crisp edge to it that makes you want to stay inside. My sister and I were bored out of our minds. We didn't have much to do back then. No video games or anything, just a few toys and each other. We were hanging out in the living room, which had these big windows that looked out into the backyard. The yard wasn't huge, but it sloped down into a thick patch of woods that seemed to go on forever. Mom always told us not to go too far into those woods, said there were animals and who knows what else, but we never thought much of it until that day. Dusk was settling in, that time when the light starts to fade and everything gets kind of quiet and eerie. The sun was dipping behind the trees, casting long shadows across the grass, and the whole world felt like it was holding its breath. My sister and I were kneeling on the couch, pressing our faces against the cool glass of the window, just watching the yard. We weren't looking for anything in particular. We were just kids killing time, maybe hoping to see a deer or a squirrel or something. Then I saw it. At first I thought it was a bear, because we had those around sometimes, but bears don't walk upright like people do. This thing was tall, really tall, I'd guess about 6.5 feet, and it was covered in this dark red-brown hair that looked matted and thick, like it had been out in the rain. It was moving slowly, kind of lumbering through the yard, heading toward the woods. Its arms were long, swinging slightly as it walked, and its body was bulky, not like a human's at all. I felt my heart jump into my throat and I grabbed my sister's arm. "Look," I whispered, but she was already staring, her eyes wide. We both froze, just watching it. It wasn't in a hurry. It moved like it belonged there, like it was just passing through. The way it walked was heavy, each step making a soft thud that I could almost feel through the window pane. The hair on its body was shaggy, and I could see muscles shifting under it, like it was strong, really strong. The light was fading fast, but there was enough to see the details. The way its shoulders hunched, the shape of its head, which was kind of flat on top, not pointed like an ape's in cartoons. This was real, solid, and right there in our yard. Then it stopped. It was maybe 20 feet from the window, and it turned its head toward us. I'll never forget that moment. Its eyes locked with mine. They were dark, deep-set, and intelligent, not like an animal's eyes at all. There was something in them, a kind of awareness that sent a chill straight down my spine. It felt like it was looking right through me, like it knew we were there, watching. My sister let out this tiny gasp, and I felt her hand tighten on mine. We were both trembling. I could feel it in my fingers, and my heart was pounding so hard I thought it would burst out of my chest. The eye contact lasted only a second or two, but it felt like forever. In that moment, all the sounds around us, the crickets starting up, the wind rustling the leaves, just vanished. It was just us and that thing, and the sheer terror of it made my stomach twist into knots. I could smell the musty scent of the old couch we were on, and I felt the cold sweat breaking out on my forehead. This wasn't a dream, it was real, and we were trapped there, watching. Then, without any warning, we both screamed and scrambled off the couch. We didn't say anything to each other. We just ran, our feet pounding on the wooden floor, heading straight for the kitchen where Mum was. I remember the feeling of the floorboards under my bare feet, the way my breath hitched in my chest, and the panic that made everything blurry. We burst into the kitchen, and Mom was at the sink washing dishes. She turned around and her face went from annoyed to confused when she saw us. "We saw something," I shouted, my voice cracking. "In the yard! A monster!" My sister was crying by then, clinging to my shirt, and I was shaking so bad I could barely stand. Mum wiped her hands on her apron and came over, trying to calm us down. "What are you two going on about?" she said, her voice firm but not unkind. She was always practical, not one for fairy tales or nonsense. I tried to explain, but the words came out in a jumble. Big, hairy, walking like a person. I pointed toward the living room, and Mum sighed, like she thought we were making it up. She walked over to the window and peered out, but by then it was almost dark and the yard was empty. "There's nothing there," she said, turning back to us. "You probably just saw a deer or a shadow. You know how your imaginations get the best of you." But we knew what we saw. We kept insisting, my sister sobbing now, and I felt this frustration building up inside me. Why wouldn't she believe us? The fear was still raw, like a fresh cut, and I could still feel those eyes on me. Mom finally gave in a little, maybe because we were so worked up, and she herded us into the bathroom. It was the smallest room in the house, with no windows, and she told us to stay there until we calmed down. "Just hide in here for a bit," she said, and she closed the door, leaving us in the dim light. We sat on the cold tile floor, huddled together, and I could hear my own heartbeat thumping in my ears. The bathroom smelled like soap and mildew, and the silence felt heavy, broken only by my sister's sniffles. I kept replaying it in my head, the way the creature moved, the look in its eyes. It wasn't aggressive or anything. It just seemed curious, maybe. But that didn't make it less frightening. For a kid, something that big and unknown is pure terror. We stayed in there for what felt like hours, but it was probably only 20 or 30 minutes. Eventually, Mom came back and let us out, and she made us some hot chocolate to calm us down. She never really believed us, though. Over the years, she'd bring it up as a funny story about how we scared ourselves silly. But to me, it was never funny. It was real, and it changed how I saw the world. I still live in that same house today, decades later. Sometimes I'll look out that living room window and remember that day. The woods are still there, though they've thinned out a bit, and I've never seen anything like it again. But I've heard stories from other people in the area, whispers about Sasquatch or Bigfoot, things that make the locals nod and not act too surprised. I don't know what it was, and I doubt I ever will. Part of me wants proof, wants to know for sure, but another part is afraid of what that might mean. If those things are out there, I hope they're left alone. They seemed peaceful, just passing through, and the last thing I'd want is for anyone to hurt them. But that memory, that one moment of eye contact, it's stuck with me. I can still feel the chill, the way my body went cold, and the panic that seized us. It's not something you forget, no matter how old you get, and every time I walk past that window at dusk, I can't help but glance out, half expecting to see it again, but hoping I never do. Story 7. Okay, so this happened to me a few years back, and I've never really talked about it with anyone because, well, who'd believe me? But I need to get it out there, because it's been eating at me ever since. I was camping alone in the mountains of British Columbia. Just me, my tent, and a whole lot of quiet. I'd done solo trips before, but this one was different from the start, though I didn't realize it until that morning. I woke up early, maybe around 6 in the morning, because the sun was just starting to peek through the trees. The air was crisp and cold, the kind that makes your breath fog up in little clouds. I remember unzipping my sleeping bag and feeling that chill hit me right away, making me shiver. My campsite was in a small clearing, surrounded by tall pines and firs, with a little stream nearby that I could hear gurgling softly. It was peaceful, the kind of peace that makes you forget about city life for a while. I got out of my tent and stretched, my joints cracking from sleeping on the ground. The ground was damp with dew, and my boots sank a bit into the soft earth as I walked over to where I'd set up my fire pit the night before. I needed to get a fire going, to warm up and cook breakfast. I'd brought some bacon and eggs with me. Simple stuff, but it always tastes better out in the wild. I gathered some dry twigs and branches from around the site, making sure they weren't too wet. My hands were a little numb from the cold, and I fumbled with the lighter a few times before I got a small flame going. I added bigger logs slowly, watching the fire catch and start to crackle. The sound was comforting, and the heat felt good on my face. I set up my small camping grill over the fire and got out my cast iron pan. The bacon was in a cooler bag, still cold, and I laid the strips out in the pan. They started sizzling almost immediately, and the smell filled the air, that rich, salty aroma that makes your mouth water. I cracked a couple of eggs into the pan next to the bacon, and they started to cook, the whites turning opaque. I was focused on that, just watching the food and thinking about how hungry I was when I first felt it. It was this weird sensation, like someone was staring at me from behind. You know that feeling you get when you're alone but not really alone. It started as a prickle on the back of my neck, a little chill that had nothing to do with the morning cold. I shrugged it off at first, thinking it was just my imagination, or maybe a squirrel or something moving in the trees, but it didn't go away. I kept feeling eyes on me, and it made the hairs on my arms stand up. I tried to ignore it, stirring the eggs with my spatula, but my heart was starting to beat a little faster. I glanced around casually, not wanting to spook myself. The tree line was about 30 feet away, a wall of dark green and brown trunks with shadows dancing between them as the sun rose higher. At first, I didn't see anything out of the ordinary, just trees, rocks, the usual stuff. But then I caught a flicker of movement out of the corner of my eye, something shifting behind a big pine tree to my left. It was quick, like a shadow darting away, and I froze for a second. My hand tightened on the spatula, and I felt a knot form in my stomach. I kept cooking, but now I was hyper-aware of everything around me. The bacon was starting to crisp up, and the eggs were almost done, but I couldn't focus on them. I kept scanning the trees, my eyes darting back and forth. That's when I saw it again. A clearer movement this time. Something was peeking out from behind that same tree. My breath hitched, and I stopped what I was doing, just staring. It was a figure, about 5 feet tall, lanky, and covered in dark brown hair. At first I thought it might be a bear cub, but bears don't stand like that. This thing was upright, on two legs, and it had a face that was almost human, but broader, with a flatter nose and deep-set eyes. It was watching me, just peeking around the tree trunk, and I could see its curiosity in the way it moved its head. It didn't look aggressive, but that didn't make me feel any better. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my ears, and my palms were sweaty despite the cold. I was terrified, but also fascinated in a sick way. I'd heard stories about Bigfoot, but I never believed them. Not really. But here was this thing, and it was real. It ducked back behind the tree, and for a second I thought it was gone, but then it peeked out again, slower this time, like it was studying me. Its eyes were dark, and I could see the intelligence in them. It wasn't just some dumb animal. It was aware, calculating. That's what scared me the most. I felt this understanding wash over me. This thing was smart, and it was curious about what I was doing. But then the fear kicked in again. Because if this was a juvenile, where was the adult? The thought made my blood run cold. I'd read that Bigfoot families stick together, and if there was a kid here, the parents couldn't be far. I didn't move. I was frozen in place, my breakfast forgotten. The bacon was probably burning by now, but I didn't care. All I could think was that if I made any sudden moves, something bad might happen. I didn't want to provoke it or attract attention from whatever else might be out there. So I just stood there, trying to breathe slowly, my eyes locked on that tree. The figure kept ducking and peeking over and over like it was playing a game. Each time it reappeared, my stomach clenched tighter. I could see its arms, long and slender, with hands that looked almost human, but hairier. It didn't make a sound, which was eerie. No grunts, no rustling, just silence. This went on for what felt like forever, but it was probably only about 10 minutes. The whole time, I was calculating my options. My truck was parked about 100 yards down the trail, but it felt like a mile away. I thought about making a run for it, but what if the adult was between me and the truck? What if this thing followed me? I was too scared to even reach for my phone or anything else. I just stood there, watching it watch me. Then, after one last peek, it pulled back into the trees. It didn't run or make any noise. It just slipped away silently, like it had never been there. I waited, holding my breath, for another minute or two, half expecting it to come back or for something bigger to emerge. But nothing happened. The forest was quiet again, except for the crackling of the fire and the stream in the background. My legs felt weak, and I had to lean against a nearby log to steady myself. I looked down at my pan. The bacon was blackened on one side, and the eggs were overcooked and rubbery. I didn't have an appetite anymore. My hands were shaking as I turned off the fire, using a stick to push the logs apart and douse them with a little water from my bottle. The steam hissed up, and the smell of wet ash mixed with the burnt food made me feel nauseous. I started packing up my gear as fast as I could. My movements were jerky, and I kept glancing over my shoulder, expecting to see those eyes again. I didn't even bother folding my tent properly. I just shoved it into its bag, along with my sleeping bag. I left the fire cold and scattered the ashes, making sure it was out. I didn't want to leave any trace, but more than that, I didn't want to stay another second. I ate a little bit of the bacon, just to have something in my stomach. But it tasted like ash. My mind was racing. I knew it wasn't a bear. Bears don't act like that, and they're not that tall or human-like. It wasn't a person either. No one would be out here dressed like that or moving so silently. It had to be what people call a juvenile Bigfoot. The thought was both terrifying and awe-inspiring. Part of me wanted to tell someone, but who would believe me? They'd say I was crazy or that it was a hoax. I loaded everything into my truck and drove out of there as soon as I could. The whole way down the mountain, I kept checking my rearview mirror, half expecting to see something following me. But the road was empty, and the forest looked normal again. By the time I got back to town, the sun was high in the sky, and everything felt surreal, like I'd stepped out of a nightmare. I never went back to that spot. To this day, I can't explain what I saw, but I know it was real. Sometimes when I'm alone in the woods, I still get that prickling feeling on my neck, and I remember those dark, intelligent eyes watching me from the trees. It's made me rethink a lot of things, but mostly it's left me with this deep, unsettled feeling that I can't shake. And that's it. That's what happened that day. Datu-du-ti, Story 8. Okay, I'll try to write this. I've never really written it all down before, just talked about it in bits and pieces with a couple of people who wouldn't think I'm completely insane. But it's been on my mind again lately, with the woods getting thick and green, and I guess I just need to get it out there. Maybe someone else has felt this too. So, I live near Clinton Falls, Indiana. Have my whole life. It's quiet here, the kind of place where you know your neighbors, but mostly keep to yourself. Behind my property, there's a big stretch of woods that rolls down towards a decent-sized lake. It's not some untouched wilderness, but it's enough to get lost in if you aren't careful. I've walked those woods since I was a kid, hunting, fishing, and in the spring, foraging for morel mushrooms. That's what this is about. Mushroom hunting. It was April of 2007. I remember because the redbuds were just starting to pop. Little purple flowers everywhere, and the air still had that cool, wet bite to it. But the sun felt warm on your skin in the clearings. I'd been out a few times already that season, having some decent luck, but this one particular day, a Tuesday I think, I decided to head back into a hollow I hadn't checked yet. It was a spot maybe a mile and a half behind the house, down a steep slope that's a real pain to climb back up, especially with a bag full of mushrooms. But the morels love those south-facing slopes where the elms have died off. The walk down was normal, birds singing, squirrels chattering, all the usual sounds. I found a few small greys right away, which was a good sign. I was focused, my eyes scanning the leaf litter, my mind on the pattern of the mushrooms, the way they hide themselves. It's a peaceful feeling, that kind of focus. You forget about everything else. But then I got closer to the bottom, near the creek that feeds into the lake. The feeling started. It's hard to describe, but it wasn't a thought. It was a physical thing. First, the back of my neck started to prickle, like a static charge was building in the air. Then the hair on my arms stood up, straight up, goosebumps all over. I stopped looking for mushrooms and just stood up straight listening. The woods had gotten quiet. Not just a little quiet, but dead quiet. No birds, no squirrels, no nothing. It was like someone had thrown a soundproof blanket over everything. That's when I heard the first footstep. It wasn't a twig snap, it was a soft, heavy crunch. Like someone with big bare feet was carefully placing their weight on a patch of dry leaves. It was off to my left, maybe 30, 40 yards away, deep in the thicker brush where the honeysuckle takes over. My first thought wasn't even fear, it was confusion. Who else would be way out here? I called out, "Hello!" My voice sounded small and stupid in all that silence. There was no answer, but a second later, I heard another one of those soft crunches. It was parallel to me. I took a couple of steps forward, my mushroom bag suddenly feeling silly in my hand. As I walked, I heard another step, keeping pace with me from the cover of the brush. I stopped dead. The footsteps stopped a half second later. My heart was starting to thump against my ribs now. This wasn't a deer bolt. They don't pace you, and it wasn't another person playing a game. The weight behind those steps felt substantial. I decided to just get out of there. I wasn't far from the lake's edge, and I figured if I could get to the more open ground near the water, I could see what was going on. I started walking again, faster this time, not even pretending to look for mushrooms, and the footsteps started again, matching my pace, step for step. It was so deliberate. It wasn't chasing me, it was escorting me. Then the rocks started. The first one landed with a dull thud in the soft earth about 10 feet to my right. It wasn't a pebble. It was a fist-sized chunk of sandstone. I flinched hard, my whole body jerking. I spun around, looking towards where the sound had come from, the same direction the footsteps were. Nothing, just thick, shadowy brush. I started almost jogging, my breath coming in short gasps. Another rock. This one skipped off the surface of the lake with a loud plunk, sending ripples out across the still water. It landed closer, maybe only 5 feet from the shore near me. The message was clear. It could see me and it had good aim. The footsteps kept pace, now sounding a little quicker, a little less careful. I was terrified, pure animal fear. I didn't know what it was, but I knew it was big, I knew it was smart, and I knew it didn't want me there. I scrambled up the slope, my legs burning, my lungs on fire, not daring to look back. I could feel it, though. I could feel this presence, this heavy, watchful feeling pressing down on me like a weight on my shoulders. It felt ancient and pissed off. I finally burst out of the tree line near my backyard, stumbling into the open grass. I bent over, hands on my knees, sucking in air. The normal sounds were back. A dog barking somewhere, a car on a distant road. I looked back at the woods. They just looked like woods, dark, quiet, and still. But I knew something was in there, standing just out of sight, watching me. I didn't go back into the deep woods for the rest of the week. I tried to write it off. A bear. We don't have bears around here. A person. No person could move that quietly and throw rocks with that kind of precision from that distance in thick cover. My mind was racing in circles. The real kicker came a few days later on Saturday night. My wife and I were just lounging on the couch, flipping through channels. We landed on one of those cable documentary shows about Bigfoot. You know the ones, with the grainy footage and guys with beards talking about tree knocks. We were laughing at it, making jokes. It seemed so ridiculous. During a commercial, my wife went out to the back porch to feed the dogs. We have 2 coonhounds, and they're usually loud, barking at everything. But when she opened the door, they were silent, just whining low in their throats, pressed up against the house. She called them, and they wouldn't even come to her for the food. She said the air felt thick, just like I'd described from my trip into the hollow. Then it happened. From the tree line, maybe 100 yards away, came a scream. It wasn't a fox, wasn't a bobcat. I've heard those my whole life. This was something else. It started low, a guttural roar that vibrated in your chest, and then it rose into this high, piercing shriek that sounded almost human, but stretched and twisted into something purely savage. It was loud, unnaturally loud. It echoed across the hollow, and for a second, everything was silent again, like the whole world was holding its breath. My wife slammed back inside, her face white as a sheet. Her hands were shaking. She locked the door behind her and just stared at me. "What was that?" she whispered. I didn't have an answer. The dogs slunk in after her and hid under the kitchen table. We stood there in the living room, not saying anything, just listening. Nothing else happened, but the feeling was back, that same heavy, watchful presence. Only now it was right at the edge of our property, right at our home. I couldn't just let it go. I called my friend, the only guy I knew who wouldn't just hang up on me. I told him something was messing with us, and I needed another set of eyes. He's a skeptical guy, a hunter, but he heard the shake in my voice and came over within the hour. It was fully dark by then, maybe 9 o'clock. We grabbed 2 powerful flashlights and my shotgun, more for psychological comfort than anything else. I didn't know what I would shoot at. We walked down the trail from my backyard, the beams of our lights cutting shaky paths through the darkness. The silence was immediate and absolute. It was like walking into a cave. No crickets, no frogs from the lake, no rustle of leaves, just our own footsteps and the sound of our breathing. We got about halfway to the hollow, to the spot where I'd first felt it days before, and we stopped. "You hear that?" my friend whispered. "Hear what?" I said. "There's nothing to hear." "Exactly," he said. He was spooked now too. You don't get silence like that in the Indiana woods at night, ever. Then we heard the first thud. It was a dull, heavy impact, like a big sack of wet sand being dropped on the ground. It came from our left. We swung our lights over, but there was nothing there, just trees and shadows. Then another thud. From our right, this time. Closer. Then a rock skipped across the surface of the lake. Plunk, plunk, plunk. We could see the ripples in the beam of my flashlight. It was out there, on the other side of the lake, and it had just thrown a rock the whole couple 100 yards across the water. That's when we heard the movement. It wasn't footsteps anymore. It was a fast, rustling sound, like something big was moving through the brush, circling us. It would go from one side to the other, behind us, then in front, never staying in one place. We were spinning around, our flashlight beams crossing and jerking, trying to catch a glimpse of it. We never saw a shape, never saw eyes, just the sound of something massive displacing air and snapping small branches as it moved, with a speed that didn't seem possible for anything that should be living in those woods. My friend grabbed my arm. We gotta go, now. We didn't need to discuss it, we just ran. We ran back up that trail like our lives depended on it, our legs pumping, not caring about the branches that whipped our faces. The whole time I could feel it. I could feel its eyes on my back, a hot, focused pressure between my shoulder blades. It wasn't chasing us. I don't think it ever was. It was just letting us know we were trespassing. It was herding us out. We burst into my backyard, gasping, and my wife was at the door, her face still pale. We stood there for a long time, just staring into the dark tree line, our hearts hammering. The dogs were going crazy inside, barking their heads off now that we were back. That was the worst of it, that one day and night, but it wasn't the end. It became a pattern, every spring, like clockwork. I'd get the feeling if I went too deep into the woods, I'd hear the footsteps, the rocks. One year, I found a bunch of small trees, saplings really, twisted and braided together in a way that no storm or animal could have done. It was a deliberate act. Another time I smelled this god-awful stench, like rotten meat and wet dog, so strong it made my eyes water, right in that same hollow. It's been years now, and it still happens. I've learned to avoid that particular area. I stick to the edges. I don't know what it is. I don't call it Bigfoot. Not really. That word feels too small, too packaged. It's just this thing that lives out there. It's large, it's intelligent, and it wants to be left alone. It doesn't want company. It just makes its presence known in the most eerie, unsettling ways possible. Sounds and thrown stones, a feeling of being watched that sinks into your bones. It left me questioning my sanity for a long time. I still do some days, but the fear is real. The memory of that scream, the feeling of those eyes on my back as I ran, that's as real as anything I've ever known. I'm forever wary now. I always look over my shoulder when I'm in the woods, because I know, without a doubt, that there's an unseen watcher in those hills, and it remembers me just as well as I remember it. And sometimes, late at night when the wind is right, I'll just stand at my back door and look out at the dark tree line, and I can still feel it out there, waiting. The TJ's Story 9. All right, I've been reading this forum for a while, but I never thought I'd be posting something like this. My name's Colin. This happened to me and my brother Jared back in July of last year, 2021. We were camping near Lake Wenatchee up in the Cascades. I'm only writing this now because it's taken me this long to even be able to talk about it without my hands shaking. I still don't know what it was, and I don't think I ever will, but I need to get it out there. Maybe someone else has heard or seen something similar. It was supposed to be a peaceful weekend, just me and Jared getting away from everything. We're both in our late 20s. We've been camping since we were kids with our dad, so we know what we're doing. We're not the kind of guys to spook easy. We found this perfect little clearing right by a creek, maybe a 15-minute hike from where we'd parked the car. It was secluded just how we like it, surrounded by these huge old-growth firs and cedars. The ground was soft with pine needles, and the sound of the creek was constant, a nice white noise. We set up our tent, one of those four-person dome ones, built a fire pit in the center of the clearing, and got a good fire going as the sun started to go down. Everything was normal. We cooked burgers on the grate we brought, drank a couple of beers, just talked about work and life, the usual stuff. The sky was clear, and you could see a crazy amount of stars once it got fully dark. We sat by the fire until it died down to embers, maybe around 11, then decided to turn in. We zipped up the tent, got into our sleeping bags, and that was that. I remember falling asleep pretty quickly to the sound of the creek and the occasional crackle from the fire pit. I don't know what time it was when I first woke up, but it was pitch black, the kind of black you only get in the deep woods, where you can't see your own hand in front of your face. The first thing I noticed, the thing that really jolted me awake, was the silence. The creek was still there, but everything else was just gone. No crickets, no frogs, no owls, nothing. It was a dead, heavy silence that felt wrong, like the forest was holding its breath. I just lay there in my sleeping bag, listening to nothing, and felt this cold knot start to form in my stomach. I could hear Jared breathing softly next to me, still asleep. Then the noises started. It wasn't a loud crash or anything dramatic. It was subtle at first, a rustling in the bushes near the edge of the clearing. Not a small animal rustle either. This was heavier, like something big was moving through the ferns. Then I heard a plastic creaking sound. I knew exactly what it was. It was our cooler. We'd left it right outside the tent, tucked up against a log. It was one of those heavy-duty igloo ones. The rustling stopped, and then I heard it again. A low, deep, rhythmic sound. A heavy breathing. It wasn't panting like a dog. It was slower, deeper, like someone with a massive chest was taking deliberate, heavy breaths. Hoo-ha! The sound was so deep I could almost feel it in the ground. That's when I reached over and shook Jared awake. I didn't say anything. I just put my hand on his shoulder and squeezed. He stirred, and I put my finger to my lips. His eyes went wide in the dark as he heard it too. We both just lay there, frozen, listening to this thing breathing right outside our tent, messing with our cooler. We had a big mag-light flashlight, the heavy metal kind. Jared slowly, so slowly, reached for it where it was lying between our sleeping bags. His hand was trembling. He clicked it on, and the beam cut through the darkness of the tent, illuminating the green nylon walls. We didn't point it at the door yet. We just held it, a little pool of safety between us. The sounds from outside changed. The plastic creaking became more violent. There was a sharp crack, and then the sound of ice cubes scattering and cans clattering onto the ground. Whatever it was had just torn the lid clean off the cooler. We heard a wet, slobbering sound, then a crunch. It was eating our food. The steaks we'd brought for the next night, the apples, just chomping through it all. Jared, his voice a terrified whisper, said, "What the hell is that?" I didn't have an answer. My heart was hammering against my ribs so hard I thought it would burst. I was sweating, but I was also cold, a clammy, sick feeling all over. "Shine the light," I whispered back, my throat so tight the words barely came out. He took a shaky breath and slowly aimed the beam of the flashlight towards the mesh screen of the tent door. That's when we saw it. The shadow fell across the screen. It was huge. I mean, impossibly huge. It was upright on two legs, and its shoulders, they were so high up, unnaturally high, like its neck was non-existent. The top of its head was above the top of the tent door. And our tent is tall enough for me to stand up in, and I'm 6 feet. This thing had to be over 8 feet tall. Easy. It was just a silhouette, a massive black shape blotting out the trees behind it, but the proportions were all wrong. It was broad, immensely broad, and covered in what looked like shaggy hair. Then the smell hit us. It seeped through the mesh, this overpowering, musky, sour stench. It smelled like a wet dog that had been rolling in rotten meat and old piss. It was so thick and foul it made my eyes water and my stomach turn. I gagged, and I saw Jared do the same. The shadow moved, and the thing took a step towards the tent. It wasn't a clumsy walk. It was deliberate, heavy. The ground seemed to shake a little with each step. Thud, thud. It stopped right in front of the tent door. We were staring at this massive silhouette through the mesh, and it was just standing there, breathing that deep, heavy breath. I could see the outline of its head. It wasn't bear-shaped. It was more like a man's, but too big, and the shoulders were just wrong. Then it moved its arm. A long, thick limb swung forward, and it didn't just tap the tent. It hit it. It was a hard, open-handed slap against the nylon wall right next to the door. The sound was a loud thwump that echoed in the small space. The entire tent shuddered. The poles, those flexible fiberglass ones, bent inward with a groan. I thought the whole thing was going to collapse on top of us. Jared screamed, a short, sharp yell of pure terror, and he dropped the flashlight. The world went black. The maglite hit the floor of the tent and rolled, the beams spinning wildly, casting crazy, leaping shadows for a second before it went out, either from the impact or Jared's thumb hitting the switch. We were plunged into absolute, utter darkness. The only sounds were our own ragged, panicked breaths and that deep, wet breathing right outside. And then it roared. It wasn't a bear roar. I've heard bears. This was different. It was deafening, a deep, guttural, wet sound that seemed to come from the bottom of its lungs. It wasn't just loud. It was a physical force. I felt it vibrate up through the ground into my bones. It was a sound of pure rage, a challenge. It felt like it lasted forever, but it was probably only a few seconds. When it stopped, my ears were ringing, and the silence that followed was even more terrifying than the noise had been. We were frozen. I think I might have been crying. I was definitely shaking. Full-body tremors I couldn't control. I could feel the cold, damp earth through the tent floor and my sleeping bag. I could hear Jared hyperventilating next to me. We could hear it moving again. It started to circle the tent. Thud. Shuffle. Thud. Its feet were heavy, crushing the twigs and pine cones underneath. We could track it by sound, by the way its shadow would occasionally blot out the faint starlight coming through the mesh windows on the other sides. It was walking around us, slowly, stalking us. That's the only word for it. It felt intelligent, deliberate. It knew we were in here, trapped and terrified. We heard it back over by the cooler. There was more crunching, the sound of plastic being crushed and twisted. It was finishing off our food, or maybe just destroying what was left. Every sound was amplified in the darkness, the crunch of an apple, the rending sound as it tore the styrofoam tray with the steaks apart, the gulp as it swallowed. It stayed out there for what felt like hours. It could have been 20 minutes, it could have been an hour. I have no idea. Time lost all meaning. We just huddled in our sleeping bags, too scared to move, too scared to speak, barely daring to breathe. The foul, musky smell never went away. It was stuck in my nose, in my throat. Then, after another low, rumbling growl that was more felt than heard, we heard it move away. Its footsteps were faster this time, crashing through the underbrush. It wasn't trying to be quiet. It was a powerful, destructive departure. We heard branches snapping, small trees cracking, the sound getting farther and farther away until it was swallowed by the night. The silence returned, but it was different. The forest was still dead quiet. Nothing was coming back to life. We didn't move. We didn't say a word. We just stayed there, huddled in the dark, listening, until the sky started to turn from black to a deep, dark blue. The first birds started to tentatively chirp. It was dawn. When we finally got the courage to move, our bodies were stiff and aching from tension. I fumbled for the flashlight, my hands so clumsy and numb with fear, I could barely work them. I found it, clicked it on. It worked. The beam was steady. We didn't say anything. We just looked at each other. Jared's face was pale. His eyes were red. I'm sure I looked the same. We slowly, carefully unzipped the tent door and peered out. The clearing was a wreck. Our cooler wasn't just open, it was destroyed. The heavy-duty plastic lid was gone, and the main body of the cooler was split in half, like something had just grabbed it and ripped it apart. Pieces of it were scattered everywhere. The food was gone. Not eaten, gone. A few wrappers, a crushed beer can, that was it. The ice was melted into a puddle, and the footprints, starting from the cooler, all around the tent, were footprints. They were huge. I'm not talking about big, I'm talking about massive. They were human-like, but they were easily 16 inches long. The toes were clear in the soft dirt, but they were kind of splayed, not neat like a boot print. The stride was long, impossibly long. They went right up to the tent wall where it had hit us, and you could see where it had stood and circled us. The ground was trampled. The worst part was the smell. That same foul, musky, sour stench still hung in the air, clinging to everything. It was fainter, but it was there. A reminder. We packed up our gear in a frantic, silent rush. We didn't speak. We just shoved everything into our packs. Didn't even bother rolling the tent properly. Just crammed it into its bag. We left the pieces of the cooler where they were. We got out of that clearing and hiked back to the car as fast as we could, looking over our shoulders the whole time. When we got to the ranger station, we were both still shaking. We tried to report it. The ranger, an older guy, listened with a neutral face. When we got to the part about the size and the footprints, his expression changed. He got evasive. He said it was probably a black bear, a big one, and that they can do surprising things when they're hungry. He said the footprints were probably distorted by the soft ground. He didn't even write anything down. He just nodded and said, "You boys have a safe trip home." We knew he didn't believe us, or maybe he did, and he just didn't want to deal with it. We drove home in complete silence. We haven't been camping since. We probably never will again. I still have nightmares about that roar, that smell, and the sight of that massive shadow looming over us. It wasn't a bear. I don't know what it was, but it was powerful. It was cunning, and it knew exactly how to terrify us. It felt like we were being played with, and to this day, I can still smell that stench if I think about it for too long. I can still feel the vibration of its roar in my chest. Whatever it was, it's still out there. Story 10. Okay, so I've never really posted anything like this before, but I need to get this out there because it's been eating at me for weeks now. I still can't sleep right, and every time I close my eyes, I see those damn eyes staring back at me. I was driving near the Sulphur River west of Folk on a Tuesday morning back in early October. The leaves were just starting to turn, you know, that kind of rusty orange and red that makes everything look pretty, but also a little lonely. I was on my way to the hospital in Folk. My mom had been there for a couple of days after a minor surgery, and I was bringing her some stuff she'd asked for, like her favorite blanket and a book she'd been meaning to read. I'd left my house around 7 in the morning, wanting to beat the traffic, but about 10 minutes into the drive, I realized I'd forgotten the book. It was sitting right on my kitchen table, and I knew my mom would be disappointed if I showed up without it. She's big on little comforts when she's stuck in a hospital bed. So I sighed, muttered a curse under my breath, and decided to turn around. The road I was on is this narrow, winding thing that follows the Sulphur River for a good stretch. It's mostly woods on either side, thick with pines and oaks, and the river itself is brownish and slow-moving, with that faint sulphur smell that gives it its name. On a normal day, it's kind of peaceful, but that morning, everything felt off from the start. I made a U-turn at a wider spot in the road, my tires crunching on the gravel shoulder. The sun was still low, casting long shadows through the trees, and the air was cool enough that I had the heater on low in my car. I remember feeling impatient, just wanting to get back home, grab the book and get on with my day. As I drove back the way I'd come, I noticed how quiet it was. No birds chirping, no rustling in the underbrush, just this heavy silence that made the hair on my arm stand up. I shrugged it off, thinking it was just because I was tired or something. Then, about 5 minutes after I turned around, I saw it. Up ahead, maybe 50 yards in front of my car, there was something standing in the middle of the road. At first I thought it was a deer. We get a lot of them around here, especially near the river. But as I got closer, I slowed down because it didn't move like a deer. It was just standing there, perfectly still, and it was too upright. My heart started thumping in my chest, and I squinted, trying to make it out through the morning haze. When I was about 30 feet away, I could see it clearly, and that's when the fear really hit me. It wasn't a deer. It was this thing, about 5 feet tall, covered in thick, matted hair that was a reddish-brown color, like wet clay mixed with rust. Its arms were long, hanging down past its knees, and its body was stocky, almost like a bear's, but way too human-like in the way it stood. But the worst part was its face. It had these piercing eyes that seemed to glow in the dim light. They were dark, almost black, but with this intensity that felt like they were drilling right into me. I've never seen anything like it, not in pictures, not in nightmares. It was just staring at me, not moving, not making a sound. I slammed on the brakes, my car skidding a little on the damp pavement. The sound of the tires screeching echoed in the silence, but the thing didn't flinch. It just kept staring. I could feel my hands shaking on the steering wheel and my breath caught in my throat. I was frozen, just staring back. And for a few seconds, it was like the whole world had stopped. I could see every detail. The way its hair was clumped together in places, like it had been rolling in mud or something, the broad, flat nose. The way its lips were pulled back slightly, showing teeth that looked too big for its mouth. But those eyes, they were intelligent, not animal-like. They held this knowing look, like it was studying me, figuring me out. Then, without warning, it turned and bolted into the woods on the side of the road. It moved fast, way faster than anything that size should be able to move. It didn't run like a person or an animal. It was this fluid, powerful motion, almost gliding into the trees. One moment it was there, the next it was gone, swallowed up by the undergrowth. I sat there for what felt like forever, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my ears. My knuckles were white from gripping the wheel, and I realized I was holding my breath. I let it out in a shaky gasp, and that's when the adrenaline really kicked in. I didn't even think about going after it or getting out of the car. Hell no. I stomped on the gas, my car lurching forward, and I sped down that road like I was being chased. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see it running after me, but there was nothing, just the empty road and the trees blurring past. The whole drive back to my house, maybe 10 minutes, was a blur. I was sweating, my shirt sticking to my back, and my mind was racing. What the hell was that, a bear? No, bears don't stand like that and they don't have eyes like that. A person in a costume. But why would anyone be out here in the middle of nowhere dressed like that at 7 in the morning? It didn't make sense. When I got home, I didn't even bother going inside right away. I just sat in my driveway, engine off, trying to calm down. My hands were still trembling, and I could feel this cold dread sitting in my stomach. I kept replaying the image in my head, those eyes, the way it looked at me. It wasn't aggressive, but it was unsettling in a way I can't even describe. Like it knew something I didn't. After a few minutes, I forced myself to go inside, grab the book, and get back in the car. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every shadow in the woods seemed to move. Every rustle of leaves made me jump. I decided to take a different route to the hospital, one that avoided the Sulphur River area altogether. It added an extra 20 minutes to my drive, but I didn't care. I just needed to get away from there. On my way, I stopped at a convenience store on the outskirts of Folk. It's this old run-down place called Hank's Gas and Go, with flickering lights and a smell of stale coffee. I needed to use the bathroom and maybe get a drink to steady my nerves. When I walked in, the bell above the door jingled and Denny Roberts was behind the counter. Denny's a guy I've known for years. He's in his 60s, been working there forever, and he's seen just about everything in this town. He took one look at me and said, "You okay, man? You look like you've seen a ghost." I leaned against the counter, my legs feeling weak. "Denny, I don't know what I saw," I said, my voice coming out all shaky. I told him everything, from forgetting the book to the thing on the road. I didn't hold back. I described the height, the hair, the eyes, how it ran off. As I talked, I could feel the fear bubbling up again, and my hands were gesturing wildly, like I was trying to paint the picture for him. Denny listened quietly, his expression serious. When I finished, he wiped down the counter with a rag and said, "Sounds like you ran into one of those Bigfoot things people talk about." He didn't laugh or dismiss it. He just said it matter-of-factly, like it was something he'd heard before. "A few folks around here have stories, especially near the river. They say the woods are old out there, full of things we don't understand." Hearing him say that made it feel more real and somehow worse. If other people had seen something similar, then it wasn't just in my head. We talked for a few more minutes, and he told me about a hunter who claimed to have seen tracks years ago, but nothing ever came of it. I bought a bottle of water and a pack of gum, my hands still unsteady as I handed him the money. Before I left, Denny looked me in the eye and said, "Be careful out there. Some things are better left alone." I drove to the hospital after that, but my mind wasn't on my mom or the book. All I could think about was that creature and what Denny had said. When I got to my mom's room, I tried to act normal, but she noticed I was off. I made up some excuse about being tired from the drive, but inside, I was a mess. The rest of the day, I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting to see those piercing eyes everywhere I went. Even now, weeks later, I can't shake it. I've driven past that spot a couple of times since then, but I never stop. The woods there feel darker, thicker, like they're hiding something. I don't know what I saw that day, and I probably never will. But every time I close my eyes, I see it staring back at me, and I'm left with this chill that won't go away. Story 11. It was November of 2013, and the whole reason any of this started was because we were supposed to be deer hunting. My buddy and I had a spot out in eastern Washington, way out in the Colville National Forest, a place we'd been going for years. It was our week, but the Tuesday before we were set to leave, I got a call from the siding contractor. His name was Mark. He sounded off, not like himself at all. He said they'd showed up at my place to start the siding work. I live on a decent-sized piece of land. The house is kind of tucked back in the trees. Not totally isolated, but, private. And almost immediately, weird stuff started happening. He said they were setting up their ladders and equipment when a rock came sailing out of the tree line. Not a pebble, he said, a rock about the size of a fist. It landed with a thud in the soft dirt near their work truck. They figured it was kids, maybe, though it's a long way for kids to come just to throw rocks. They shouted into the woods, "Hey, knock it off," and got back to work. Then another one came, and this one hit one of the crew, a guy named Leo, right in the shoulder. Mark said it wasn't thrown like a kid skipping a stone. It was like it was launched. Had a real force behind it. It left a nasty bruise. That's when they started to get uneasy. Who throws a rock that hard? They packed up their tools and left for the day. They said they'd come back the next morning in the daylight, and hopefully whoever it was would be gone. I was annoyed, to be honest. This was putting our hunting trip in jeopardy. I needed this work done before the real winter weather hit. I told Mark, just try again tomorrow. It was probably just some idiot. But the way he was talking, the tension in his voice, it stuck with me. It felt like he wasn't telling me everything. The next day, Wednesday, I decided to drive out to the property to check on things myself. I figured if I was there, my presence might deter whatever local yahoo was messing with them. I got there around 10 in the morning. The crew was already there, Mark and two other guys, Leo and another fella whose name I never caught. They were quiet. Not the usual joking around you get with a construction crew. They were just focused on their work. But you could see them glancing towards the woods every few seconds. The woods. That's the first thing that hit me. It was too quiet. I've lived out there for 15 years. You get used to the sounds, the chatter of squirrels, the scolding of jays, the rustle of leaves as deer move through. That day, there was nothing. It was dead silent. Not even the wind was moving the pine branches. It was an eerie, heavy silence, the kind that feels like it's pressing down on your eardrums. I walked over to Mark. "Everything okay today?" I asked. He just shook his head, not really looking at me, his eyes scanning the tree line. "So far. But it feels wrong, man. It feels all wrong." I decided to take a walk around the perimeter of the clearing. The tree line is maybe 20-25 feet from the back of the house. It's thick with ponderosa pine and fir, lots of underbrush. As I walked, I tried to see anything out of place, trampled bushes, footprints, anything, but there was nothing. It was just woods. Yet the silence was so absolute it was unnerving. It was like every living thing had been scared away or was holding its breath. I went back to the house and helped them for a bit, just holding a board in place, trying to act normal. But the mood was contagious. We were all on edge. The guys worked fast, efficiently, but without any talk. The only sounds were the zip of their utility knives, the bang of the hammers, and the rustle of their jackets. The silence from the forest was a presence in itself. They worked straight through, no lunch break, just wanting to get as much done as possible. As the afternoon wore on and the shadows started to get long, you could feel the tension ratcheting up. The sun dips early in November, and the woods were already getting dark. It was around 4:30. The light was starting to fail, turning everything a dull grey. We were just about to call it a day. I was standing by my truck, and the guys were starting to pack their tools. That's when we heard it. It wasn't a sound you could mistake for anything else. It came from the trees, so close it felt like it was right on top of us. 5, maybe 8 yards into the woods, max. It was a growl, but it wasn't a bear. I've heard bears. This was different. It was low, guttural, a deep rumbling that seemed to vibrate in your chest. But layered on top of that was this higher-pitched, almost chattering sound. It was unnatural. It was a sound that had no business coming from a living thing in those woods. It wasn't just aggressive, it was intelligent. It felt like a warning, a very specific, very clear, "Get the hell out." The effect was instantaneous. Leo, the guy who'd been hit by the rock, just froze, his eyes wide, a cordless drill hanging limp in his hand. The other guy took a stumbling step backward. Mark looked at me, and his face was pure, undiluted fear. It wasn't the startled jump you get from a loud noise. It was the deep primal fear of something you don't understand, something that should not exist. "Okay," Mark said, his voice tight and quiet. "We're leaving, now." Nobody argued. We didn't run. It was more of a frantic, controlled scramble. We threw tools into boxes, not caring about order. Ladders were collapsed and heaved into the truck bed. The whole time that silence had returned, but it was a different silence now. It was a listening silence. We were being watched. I could feel it on the back of my neck, a cold, prickling sensation. Every hair on my arms was standing up. We piled into our vehicles. Them in their work truck, me in my pickup. We didn't even shut the doors properly, just pulled them closed and started the engines. As I backed out, my headlights swept across the tree line. For a split second, I thought I saw a shape. Something massive and dark, standing just inside the wall of trees. It was taller than a man, and broader, and it was just standing there. Then the lights moved, and it was gone. I didn't say anything. I just put the truck in drive and got out of there. We regrouped at the end of my long driveway, out on the main road. We sat there with the engines running for a minute, nobody saying anything. Mark finally rolled down his window. "We are not going back there after dark," he said. "I don't care what you pay us, that's not an animal. I don't know what that is, but it's not an animal." I believed him. I'd heard it too. I told him I understood. We agreed they'd come back, but only for a few hours in the middle of the day, and only if I was there too. They were spooked, and frankly, so was I. My hunting trip was completely forgotten. This was all I could think about. The next day, Thursday, we met back at the house at 11 in the morning. The sun was high, and it should have felt safe. It didn't. That heavy, watchful silence was still there. No birds, no squirrels. We worked like machines for 3 hours. The three of them and me, all of us with one eye on the woods the entire time. We didn't speak unless it was about the work. Hand me that level. Nail guns jammed. That kind of thing. The normal sounds of the forest never returned. It was just us and the oppressive quiet. By 2 in the afternoon, they had finished the last section they absolutely had to do. Mark said it was enough. They could work with what was done, and they weren't coming back. I didn't try to convince them otherwise. I paid them in cash, right there, and they left in a hurry. I stayed. I don't know why. Maybe I needed to prove something to myself. I walked around the house, the finished siding looking bright and new against the old wood. The place looked normal, but it didn't feel normal. It felt violated, like something had come out of its territory and into mine and left its mark. I walked to the edge of the tree line, right where the sound had come from. The ground was soft from recent rain, and that's when I saw them, footprints. They were huge. I wear a size 12 boot, and I placed my foot next to one of them. It was easily half again as long and wider. The print was deep, like whatever made it was immensely heavy. The stride was long, effortless. They weren't clear, not like in the movies. They were blurred and messy in the pine needles and dirt, but the size and the shape were undeniable. It was a bipedal track. Something had been walking on 2 legs right there, watching us. I followed the tracks for a few yards, my heart hammering in my throat. They led to a small, stunted pine tree. About 6 feet up, a branch as thick as my wrist was snapped clean in half, the broken end pointing outward toward the house. It wasn't broken and hanging down. It was snapped and shoved aside, like something massive had just pushed its way through and didn't care what was in its path. That was it for me. The curiosity was gone, replaced by a cold, solid dread. I turned around and walked back to my truck, not running but walking fast, my back itching the whole way. I got in, locked the doors, and just sat there for a minute, staring at my house. It looked the same as it always had, but I knew it was different now. I knew the woods around it were different. I never went back to stay there. I sold the place 6 months later, told the realtor it was just too remote for me. I never told the new owners anything. What would I say? I still have the hunting cabin, but I haven't been back to that part of the forest since. Every now and then, when I'm out in the woods and everything goes quiet, that feeling comes back. The feeling of being watched by something that doesn't belong. And I remember that low, intelligent growl from 5 yards away. And I just know, we weren't alone out there. We were never supposed to be. Story 12. I remember it was pitch black out, with no moon, and the only light came from the excavator's headlights, cutting through the darkness. The road was brand new, just gravel and dust, not even properly graded yet, so everything was loose under the tracks. I was driving slow, maybe 5 miles an hour, just trying to stay focused because the path was uneven. The air was cool for August, with that damp smell you get before rain, but it hadn't started yet. I had the radio on low, some staticky station playing old songs, but I turned it off after a bit because the silence felt heavier than usual. Maybe I was already on edge because it was my birthday and I was alone out there, thinking about how I should have been home with a beer instead. That's when I saw them, the tracks. At first I thought it was just some animal prints, maybe deer or something, but as I got closer I realized they were nothing like that. I slowed the excavator to a crawl and leaned forward, squinting through the windshield. The headlights lit up the dust, and there they were. 3 sets of footprints, all pressed deep into the soft ground. One was huge, like way bigger than any bear track I'd ever seen, with a shape that was almost human but not quite. Wider, with toes that looked too long and spread out. Then there was a medium-sized one, and a smaller one, like a kid's footprint, but again, wrong somehow. They were all in a straight line, parallel to the road, with consistent spacing between them, like whatever made them was walking in a single file. My heart started thumping hard in my chest, and I felt this chill run down my back. I've been in the woods most of my life, hunting and fishing, so I know what animal tracks look like. Deer, elk, coyotes, even the occasional cougar. But these, they didn't match anything. The big one was at least 18 inches long, and the shape was off, like the arch was too high, and the toes weren't rounded. They looked fresh too, because the dust was still settling around the edges, not blown away by the wind. I sat there for a minute, just staring, and my hands got sweaty on the controls. Part of me wanted to ignore it and keep driving, but curiosity got the better of me. I figured maybe it was some prank or something, but who'd be out here in the middle of the night on a new road? I decided to follow them. I put the excavator in neutral and climbed down, my boots crunching on the gravel. The air felt thick, and every little sound, the rustle of leaves, the distant hoot of an owl, made me jump. I pulled out my flashlight from my pocket and shone it on the tracks. Up close, they were even weirder. The big one was deep, like whatever made it was heavy, and the toes had this almost finger-like appearance, but without claws. The medium one was similar, just smaller, and the small one looked like a miniature version, but still with that unnatural shape. They were spaced about 3 feet apart, all in a perfect line, as if whatever it was walked deliberately, not wandering like an animal would. I started walking alongside them, keeping the excavator's headlights as my guide, because I didn't want to stray too far into the trees. The tracks ran parallel to the road for what felt like forever. Later, I realized it was over a mile. As I walked, I kept glancing around, half expecting to see something moving in the shadows. My breath was coming in short puffs in the cool air, and I could feel my pulse in my ears. The woods felt alive in a way I'd never noticed before, like everything was watching me. I remember the smell of pine and damp earth, and the way the flashlight beam would catch on spiderwebs or leaves, making me flinch. About halfway, I stopped to catch my breath, and that's when I noticed how quiet it had gotten. No more owls, no rustling, just this dead silence. It was eerie, like the forest was holding its breath. I shone the light ahead, and the tracks just kept going, unwavering. I thought about turning back, but something pushed me forward. Maybe it was the birthday thing, like this was some weird gift from the universe, and I had to see it through. My mind was racing with possibilities. Could it be bears? But bears don't walk in a line like that, and their tracks are different, with claws. Bigfoot? I'd heard stories, but I always brushed them off as nonsense. Now standing there, it didn't seem so crazy. I kept walking, and the tracks led me right to the edge of the job site. That's where they ended. Just stopped, like whatever made them vanished into thin air. One moment, they were there, clear as day, and the next, nothing. No signs of them turning off into the woods, no broken branches, nothing. It was as if they reached this spot and poof, gone. I stood there, shining my light around, and my skin prickled with goosebumps. The job site was just a cleared area with some equipment stacked up, piles of logs, a couple of trailers. But in the dark, it felt like a stage for something I didn't understand. I scanned the trees, but it was too dark to see much, and the silence was deafening. That's when I heard the excavator's engine still running behind me, and I hurried back, feeling exposed. I climbed into the cab and just sat there for a few minutes, my heart still pounding. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a group of hikers or something, but who hikes in the middle of the night on a private logging road? And why would their footprints look like that? It didn't make sense. I decided to wait for my boss and his nephew to show up. They were supposed to meet me there later to go over some plans. It wasn't long before I saw their truck's headlights coming down the road. When they pulled up, I got out and waved them over. My boss is a no-nonsense guy, been in logging for decades, and his nephew is a young kid, eager but green. I led them to where the tracks ended, and I could see the confusion on their faces as soon as they saw them. My boss knelt down, running his hand over the big print. "What in the hell?" he muttered. He looked up at me, and his eyes were wide. "I've never seen anything like this. That's massive." His nephew chimed in, pointing at the different sizes. "Yeah, look, it's like a family or something, but what kind of animal makes tracks like that?" We all stood there, shaking our heads. My boss tried to take a photo with his phone, but the light was bad and it just came out blurry. We talked about it for a bit, throwing out ideas. Maybe it was a moose, but moose tracks are hooved, not like this, or a person in some weird footwear, but the shape was all wrong. Nothing fit. That's when the rain started. At first, it was just a light drizzle, barely noticeable, but then it picked up, coming down harder. We all looked at each other, and I felt this sinking feeling in my gut. The rain was washing the tracks away right in front of us. We watched as the water filled the impressions, turning the dust to mud, and within minutes, they were gone. Just like that, no evidence left. My boss shrugged and said, "Well, that's that, probably nothing." But I could tell he was spooked too. He kept glancing around like he expected something to jump out. His nephew was quiet, just staring at the spot where the tracks had been. We ended up calling it a night because the rain was getting heavier and there wasn't much we could do. I drove the excavator back to the storage area, my mind racing the whole time. The rain hammered on the roof and I kept replaying everything in my head. The way the tracks looked, the silence, the abrupt end. By the time I got home, it was early morning, and I was soaked and shivering. I took a hot shower, but I couldn't shake the cold feeling inside. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, and every time I closed my eyes, I saw those footprints. The next day, I went back to the site with my boss, and sure enough, there was nothing left. The rain had erased everything, and the road was just a muddy mess. We never talked about it again after that, but I could tell it stuck with all of us. For weeks, I'd find myself looking over my shoulder when I was out in the woods, or I'd wake up in the middle of the night from dreams about those tracks. It's been years now, and I still don't have any answers. What were they? Why did they appear that night on my birthday, only to be washed away? I'll probably never know, but the memory of it haunts me. The mystery, the fear, and the way it all just vanished, leaving me with nothing but questions. Story 13. All right, so I've been sitting on this for a while, but I think I need to get it out there. I've never told this to anyone except my hunting partner, and even then, I don't think he fully gets it. This happened last fall, right in the middle of deer season at the Jefferson Proving Grounds in southern Indiana. I've been hunting there for years. It's this huge, kinda eerie place with old military grounds and dense woods, and you always hear stories, but I never put much stock in them until that day. I woke up early that morning, way before the sun was up. The air was cold and damp, the kind that seeps into your bones and makes you wish you'd worn an extra layer. I remember my breath fogging up in the beam of my headlamp as I packed my gear into the truck. My bow was tuned, arrows sharp, and I had that mix of excitement and nervousness I always get before a hunt. My hunting partner, let's call him Mike, though that's not his real name, was meeting me there. We'd agreed to set up about 500 yards apart to cover more ground, but we'd stay in touch via radio if needed. I drove into the proving grounds just as the sky was starting to lighten from black to a deep, bruised purple. The gates were open, and the place was quiet, almost too quiet. You know how sometimes the woods feel alive, but other times they just feel waiting. That's how it felt. I parked my truck in our usual spot, grabbed my stand and pack, and headed in. The ground was crunchy with frost, and every step sounded louder than it should have, like I was announcing myself to everything out there. I picked a spot along a firebreak. It's this cleared lane through the woods, maybe 20 feet wide, where they control burns or whatever. It gives you a good view down into the thicker areas, and deer like to cross there. I've had luck in that spot before. Setting up the tree stand took me about 20 minutes. My fingers were numb from the cold, and I fumbled with the straps a bit, but I got it secure about 15 feet up in a sturdy oak. Once I was settled, I just waited. The sun came up slowly, casting long shadows through the trees, and the woods started to wake up. Birds chirping, squirrels chattering, normal stuff. I remember feeling pretty good, sipping some coffee from my thermos and just enjoying the peace. Around 9 or 10 in the morning, I saw a few deer moving in the distance, but nothing close enough for a shot. Time dragged on, and I started to get that restless feeling. You know, when your legs cramp up and you're just willing something to happen. Then, just after noon, I'd say around 12:30, I spotted a decent-sized buck stepping out into the firebreak. My heart jumped into my throat. He was maybe 40 yards away, broadside, perfect. I drew my bow slowly, trying to keep my breathing steady. The release felt smooth, and I heard the thud as the arrow hit. He bolted, crashing into the brush on the other side. I waited a few minutes, then climbed down to track him. The blood trail was light at first, but I followed it into this thick, nasty briar patch. Thorns tore at my clothes and skin, and I had to crawl in some spots. After about half an hour of pushing through that mess, I lost the trail completely. The blood just stopped, and I couldn't find any more sign. Frustration hit me hard. I'd put in all that effort for nothing. I remember standing there, sweat cooling on my back, feeling defeated. The woods felt heavier suddenly, like they were closing in on me. I decided to head back to my tree stand. It was easier to backtrack than keep fighting the brush. By the time I got there, it was probably around 1 or 2 in the afternoon. I climbed back up, feeling tired and a little pissed off. The rest of the afternoon was quiet. I spent a lot of it just watching the sky. Jefferson Proving Grounds is still used by the Air Force sometimes, so planes would buzz overhead now and then. It was weird hearing those jets roar by while I'm sitting in this ancient forest, like two different worlds colliding. I ate a sandwich, drank some water, and tried to shake off the funk from losing that deer. As evening started to settle in, the light changed. It got that golden, hazy quality that makes everything look soft and dreamy. But then the sounds changed too. At first, I heard these distant howls. I figured they were coyotes. We get them out here all the time, and their cries can carry for miles. They were far off, maybe a mile or 2 away, and I didn't think much of it. But then the howls got closer, and they sounded different, deeper, more guttural, not like any coyote I'd ever heard. It set my teeth on edge, but I told myself it was just the wind or my imagination. Maybe an hour before sunset, I started hearing something moving through the woods toward me, not from where the howls were, but from the direction I'd lost the deer. At first, I thought it was another deer, maybe spooked by whatever was making those noises. My heart picked up again. Maybe I'd get a second chance. I nocked an arrow and got ready, peering through the leaves. The sound was heavy, like something big pushing through undergrowth. Branches snapping, leaves rustling, but it was moving fast, too fast for a deer. I remember feeling a prickle on the back of my neck, this unease that started to grow. Then I saw it through an opening in the trees. Not a deer. This thing was black, or maybe a really dark brown, and it had this hump on its back, like a gorilla but bigger. It was tall, I'm 6'1", and this thing had to be at least 6.5 feet, maybe more. And broad, way broader than me, with shoulders that looked like they could smash through anything. It was moving through this dense briar patch, the same one that had slowed me down to a crawl earlier. But it wasn't slowed down at all. It just plowed through, like the thorns and vines were nothing. Its arms swung as it moved, and it had this effortless gait. almost graceful in a way that made my stomach clench. I froze. I couldn't even breathe. My hands were shaking so bad I almost dropped my bow. It crossed the fire break in maybe 2 or 3 strides. I'm not kidding. It covered ground that would have taken me a minute or 2 to navigate in seconds. And the way it moved, it wasn't human, but it wasn't like any animal I'd ever seen either. It was too upright, too smooth, like it was built for that terrain in a way nothing else is. I got a clear look at its face for a split second. Dark, no distinct features from that distance. But I could see it was hairy all over, and it had this intense presence that made the air feel thick. It disappeared into the woods behind me, and that's when the terror really hit. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my ears. I didn't wait around to see if it came back. I scrambled down from that tree stand so fast I almost fell, fumbling with the straps, my hands slippery with sweat. I didn't even pack up properly, just grabbed my bow and started half running, half stumbling back toward the truck. Every noise made me jump. Every rustle of leaves felt like it was right behind me. I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting to see that thing following me, but there was nothing. The woods had gone dead quiet again, like whatever had been there had sucked all the sound out with it. I made it to the truck in what felt like forever, but was probably only 10 or 15 minutes. My legs were shaking, and I was breathing so hard I thought I might pass out. I jumped in, locked the doors, and just sat there for a minute trying to calm down. That's when Mike showed up. He'd heard me on the radio earlier, but hadn't responded, and he looked puzzled when he saw me. I must have been pale as a ghost. He asked if I was okay, and I just blurted out what I'd seen. He told me he'd heard something big moving around his area too, crashing sounds, like something heavy running through the brush. But he hadn't seen anything. He thought it might be a bear or something, but bears aren't common there, and this sounded bigger. We decided to head to the checkout station together. At the proving grounds, you have to check in and out so they know who's where. When we got there, the guy running the station asked how our hunt went, and I mentioned what I'd seen, trying to sound casual, but probably failing miserably. He looked at his records and said no one else was hunting in our area that day, no other permits, no one else checked in. That hit me like a punch to the gut. If it wasn't another hunter and it wasn't a bear or a deer, what the hell was it? We drove back to town in silence. I kept replaying it in my head, the way it moved, the size of it, the sheer speed. I've spent my whole life in the woods, and I've never seen anything like that. Nothing that should be able to move through thick brush like it was nothing. Nothing that tall and broad, that unnatural. I didn't sleep well that night, and I haven't been back hunting since. Every time I close my eyes, I see it crossing that fire break, and I feel that same cold fear. I don't know what it was, but I know it wasn't anything I ever want to see again. And that's the thing. I can't explain it. Not to myself. Not to anyone. It just happened, and now it's stuck with me. Like a shadow I can't shake. Story 14. I live about 5 miles outside of a town so small it barely has a stoplight. My nearest neighbor is a half-mile down the road. Out here, the night noises are just part of the background. Crickets, the occasional hoot of an owl, the rustle of something small in the leaves. You get used to it. It becomes white noise. So when a sound ripped me out of a dead sleep, it was because it was wrong. It wasn't a natural sound. My eyes snapped open in the pitch black of my bedroom. My heart was already hammering against my ribs, a frantic, panicked drumbeat. I lay there frozen, listening, trying to place what I'd heard. It had been a clatter, a hard plastic clatter, like something big had knocked over one of my trash cans on the front porch. My first thought, my only sane thought, was a bear. We get black bears around here. They're not uncommon. They're usually just looking for an easy meal and will run off if you make a racket. I let out a slow, shaky breath, trying to calm myself down. Just a bear. Just a damn bear. I swung my legs out of bed, the old wooden floorboards cool under my bare feet. The digital clock on my bedside table glowed red. 12:42. I crept out of my room and into the short hallway that leads to the living room. The house was dark and silent, except for the thumping of my own heart in my ears. That's when I realized how quiet it was. The crickets had stopped. The woods were utterly, completely silent. It was a void of sound, a heavy, pressing stillness that felt wrong. It felt like the whole world was holding its breath. I moved to the big front window that looks out onto the porch. The curtains were mostly drawn, but there was a gap between them. I didn't turn on any lights. I just edged forward. My breath caught in my throat and peered through the slit in the curtains. The porch light wasn't on, but there was enough of a sliver of moon to cast a weak, silvery light. I could see the shape of my two big plastic trash cans. One was on its side, and there was a shape, a huge, dark shape, hunched over it. My brain, still clinging to the bear theory, tried to make the shape fit, but it wouldn't. This was too tall, too upright. It was crouched, but even crouching, its back was level with the top of the porch railing. That would put it at well over 6 feet tall if it stood up. It was covered in what looked like long, shaggy hair, dark brown or black, matted and filthy. It looked less like fur and more like a wet, mangy coat. It was rummaging through the spilled garbage with its hands. I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. Those weren't paws. They were hands. Big, powerful-looking hands with long, thick fingers. They were dark, almost black in the dim light, and they moved with a horrible, deliberate dexterity. It would pick up a leftover chicken bone or a wad of spoiled vegetables and bring it to its face. And then I heard the sounds. It wasn't the chomping or grunting of a bear. It was a deep, wet, chewing sound, a squelching, slobbering noise that was unnervingly loud in the absolute quiet. It was the sound of something with a big mouth and strong jaws just mashing up garbage. Every now and then there was a low, guttural rumble, not a growl, more like a vibration, a contented hum that was somehow worse than any snarl could have been. I stood there, frozen at the window, my fingers gripping the windowsill so hard the wood dug into my skin. I couldn't look away. My eyes were glued to this thing, this impossible thing on my porch. The smell started to seep in through the window frame, even though it was shut tight. It was a thick, heavy stench, like a mix of rotten meat, wet dog, and something else. Something deeply musky and wild, like a bog or a stagnant pond. That's when I thought of my dog, Rex. He's a big German shepherd, not a dog that spooks easy. He sleeps in my room, and he always barks his head off at any little noise. Why hadn't he made a sound? A fresh wave of cold dread washed over me. I slowly, carefully, turned my head to look back down the dark hallway toward my bedroom door. It was open a crack. And there, in the shadows, I could just make out the shape of Rex. He wasn't standing. He wasn't even lying down. He was crouched, belly flat to the floor, his head down between his front paws. His whole body was rigid, trembling slightly. I could see the faint gleam of his eyes, wide and unblinking, fixed on the front of the house. He wasn't barking. He wasn't whining. He was utterly, terrifyingly silent. He was more scared than I was. I turned back to the window, my own fear magnified tenfold by my dog's terror. If Rex, who'd once chased a bear off this very property, was this scared, then whatever was on my porch was something beyond a bear, something he instinctively knew not to challenge. The creature seemed to be finding less in the trash can. It straightened its back a little, and I got a better sense of its size. It was massive. Its shoulders were incredibly broad, and the top of its head, even while it was still mostly crouched, was only a foot or so from the underside of my porch roof. The long hair on its arms was caked with dirt and what looked like bits of leaves. It lifted its head slightly, and I saw its profile against the dim light. The head was large and blocky, sitting on a thick, powerful neck. I could see a heavy, bony brow ridge shadowing its eyes, and then it turned its head. It didn't snap its head around. It was a slow, deliberate turn, like it was scanning the woods. But its head swung toward the window, toward me. My blood turned to ice water in my veins. I stopped breathing. I don't think my heart even beat for a full 5 seconds. I was looking directly into its face. It was the most unsettling thing I have ever seen in my life. It wasn't a gorilla. It wasn't a man. It was something in between, something that shouldn't exist. The brow was heavy and prominent, casting its eyes into deep, dark sockets. I couldn't see the color of its eyes, just 2 points of faint reflected light. Like a deer's eyes in headlights, but somehow more intelligent, more aware. It had a broad, flat nose with wide nostrils. And its mouth was wide, with lips that seemed strangely defined, not just a slit in a muzzle. They were pulled back slightly, and I could see the glint of large, thick teeth. It wasn't making a mean face. It wasn't snarling. Its expression was just blank. Curious, maybe. It looked right at the window, right at the gap in the curtains where I was standing. It felt like it was looking directly into me. It knew I was there. It had known the whole time. We stayed like that for what felt like an eternity, locked in that silent stare. I could feel the weight of its gaze, a physical pressure. I was trembling all over, a fine, uncontrollable shake. My palms were slick with sweat. I was convinced it was going to come through the window, that it would just stand up, take one step and smash through the glass and the wood frame like it was nothing. But it didn't. After a few more seconds that stretched into forever, it turned its head back toward the woods. It made that low, rumbling hum again, deep in its chest. Then it moved. It straightened up to its full height. This is the image burned into my brain, the one that wakes me up at night. As it stood, its back and the top of its head brushed against the wooden slats of my porch roof. My porch roof is 7 feet high. This thing had to be at least 7 feet tall, maybe 7.5. It was an absolute giant, a wall of muscle and matted hair. The sheer bulk of it was staggering. It made the porch, which I'd always thought was spacious, look like a dollhouse. It didn't scramble or lope away like an animal. It took a step, then another, with a slow, powerful, deliberate stride. Its gait was smooth, almost fluid, but with a heavy weight to it. I could feel the thud of its steps through the floorboards of the porch. Thump, thump. It walked right off the porch steps and onto the gravel path that leads into the woods. It didn't look back, it just walked, its long arms swinging slightly at its sides, and melted into the tree line. The darkness of the woods swallowed it whole. I didn't move. I couldn't. I stayed plastered to that window for another 10 minutes, just staring at the spot where it had disappeared. The woods were still dead silent. The crickets didn't start up again. Nothing moved. The smell lingered. Eventually my legs gave out, and I slid down the wall to sit on the floor, my back against it. I just sat there in the dark, shaking, listening to the frantic beat of my own heart. Rex finally crept out of the hallway and came over to me, pushing his head under my arm, whining softly for the first time. He was still trembling. When the first hints of dawn started to lighten the sky, I finally found the courage to move. I got up, my joints stiff and aching from tension, and I went to the front door. I unlocked it, my hands still shaking, and slowly, carefully opened it a few inches. The cold morning air hit me, and with it, that smell. It was fainter now, but still there. I looked out. The trash can was still on its side. Garbage was scattered all over the porch. Old vegetable peelings, moldy bread, chicken bones that had been cracked open and sucked clean. And on the wooden planks of the porch floor, right where the creature had been standing, was a greasy, dark residue. It was thick and smeared, like it had dripped off its filthy hair. There were a few long, dark hairs stuck in the grease. I didn't clean it up. Not then. I just stepped back, closed the door, locked it, and slid the deadbolt across. I went and got every trash can from outside and dragged them into my shed. I haven't left them out overnight since. The woods have been different since that night. They're quieter. The birds don't sing as much right around my property. There are times, especially in the late evening, when the silence feels just as heavy and watchful as it did that night. I never go out after dark anymore, not for anything. I still see it when I close my eyes. That slow turn of its head, that face that wasn't animal and wasn't human, that feeling of being seen, truly seen by something that wasn't supposed to be real. I don't know what it was. I don't care what anyone else calls it. I just know it was here, on my porch, and it knew I was watching, and it didn't care. And sometimes, when the wind is just right, I catch a whiff of that same rotten, musky smell on the air, and I know it's still out there. Story 15. Okay, so this happened on Christmas evening, just last year. I'm still kind of shaking as I type this out, and I've gone over it in my head 1,000 times, but I need to get it down somewhere because it's eating me up inside. I don't expect anyone to believe me, but I swear on everything this is real. I was there, and I saw it with my own eyes. It was around 6 o'clock in the evening, and I was driving home after spending the day with my family. We'd had a big dinner, exchanged gifts, all that normal Christmas stuff. I live out in a pretty rural area, so to get back to my place, I have to take these back roads that wind through farmland and patches of woods. They're not well lit, and there's hardly ever any traffic, especially on a holiday. I remember feeling tired and full, just wanting to get home, curl up on the couch and maybe watch a movie or something. The sky was already dark, but it was one of those clear winter nights where the stars are out and the air feels crisp and cold. I had the heater on in my car, and the radio was playing some Christmas songs, but I wasn't really paying attention. My mind was just drifting, thinking about the day and how nice it had been. The road I was on is called Old Mill Road. It's mostly straight for a while, but then it curves around a big field on the left and dips into a wooded area on the right. I've driven it 100 times, so I know it like the back of my hand. That night, though, something felt off from the start. I can't really explain it, but it was like the air was heavier, or maybe I was just more aware of how alone I was out there. The headlights of my car were cutting through the darkness, but beyond that, it was just blackness. No houses, no other cars, nothing. I remember glancing at the clock on my dashboard and seeing it was just past 6:15, and I figured I had about 20 minutes left until I'd be home. As I came around one of the curves, I noticed something moving at the edge of the field up ahead. At first, I thought it might be a deer. We get a lot of them around here, and they sometimes dart across the road. I slowed down a bit, just to be safe. But as I got closer, I realized it wasn't a deer. It was taller, and it was standing upright. My heart started beating a little faster, because why would someone be out here in the middle of nowhere on Christmas? I squinted, trying to make it out in the dim light from my headlights. That's when I saw it clearly, and I swear my blood ran cold. It was a creature, but not like anything I'd ever seen before. It was thin, like painfully thin. I'd guess it was around 6'2" to 6'5" tall, but it couldn't have weighed more than 150 pounds. Its ribs were visible through its skin, which was pale and almost grayish in the light. It had patchy hair all over its body, kind of a tangled, matted brown, and its skin looked stretched and unhealthy. But the worst part was its face. Its eyes were glowing red, like two little coals, and it had blood smeared around its mouth and on its hands. I could see it clearly because it was standing right at the edge of the road, maybe 20 feet from my car, and it was up on its toes, like it was balancing or something. Its chest was moving rapidly, and it was exhaling in these quick, shallow breaths that made little clouds in the cold air. I could hear the sound, a kind of wet, raspy noise, even over the hum of my engine. I froze. My hands were glued to the steering wheel, and I just stared. I couldn't look away. It was so gaunt and starved-looking that part of me felt sorry for it, but the other part was terrified because of the blood and those red eyes. It didn't move at first. It just stood there, staring right back at me. Its gaze was intense, like it was studying me, and I felt this primal fear wash over me. My stomach twisted into a knot and I started sweating even though it was cold inside the car. I remember my breath catching in my throat, and I think I might have whispered, "What the hell?" under my breath, but I'm not sure. Everything seemed to slow down. Then it took a step forward, still on its toes, and I flinched. I thought it was going to come toward the car, and my mind raced with what to do. Should I drive away? But I was afraid if I moved too suddenly, it might charge or something. I've never been so scared in my life. I could see the details now. The way its skin clung to its bones, the patches where hair was missing, revealing raw-looking skin underneath. The blood on its mouth was dark and fresh, and it had streaks of it on its hands like it had been eating or touching something. I kept thinking, is it sick? Is it diseased? That made it even scarier, because what if it was contagious or something? But it didn't look aggressive. It just looked pitiful. And that somehow made it worse, because the pity mixed with the fear made me feel confused and helpless. It stood there for what felt like forever, but it was probably only a few seconds. Then, without any warning, it turned and ran into the field. It moved fast, but in a weird loping way, like it was struggling, but still covering ground quickly. I watched it disappear into the darkness, and for a moment I just sat there, stunned. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my ears, and my hands were trembling. I took a deep breath, and that's when I noticed the smell. It had left behind this faint coppery odor like blood, mixed with something earthy and rotten. I don't know how I smelled it through the closed windows, but I did, and it made me gag. I finally snapped out of it and hit the gas, speeding away as fast as I could. I didn't look back. I drove the rest of the way home in a daze, my mind racing. What was that thing? Was it some kind of animal? But it was too human-like, with its upright posture and those hands. And the blood, where did it come from? I kept checking my rearview mirror, half expecting to see it following me, but there was nothing. The road was empty, and the night felt even darker and more oppressive than before. When I got home, I parked the car and just sat in the driveway for a few minutes, trying to calm down. My legs felt weak when I got out, and I hurried inside, locking the door behind me. I didn't sleep much that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw its face, those red eyes, the blood, the way it stood on its toes. I kept thinking about how thin it was, like it was starving, and I wondered if it was suffering. But then I'd remember the fear and I'd shiver. I've thought about going back to that spot during the day, but I haven't had the courage. What if it's still out there? What if there are more? I've talked to a couple of people about it, but they just think I'm crazy or that I saw a bear or something. But bears don't stand on their toes like that, and they don't have red eyes or blood on their mouths. I know what I saw, and it wasn't any animal I've ever heard of. Even now, months later, I get chills thinking about it. I avoid driving on Old Mill Road after dark, especially around Christmas. Sometimes when I'm alone at night, I'll catch a movement out of the corner of my eye, and my heart will skip a beat, but I never see anything. Part of me hopes I never do again, but another part is curious. What was it? Where did it come from? And why was it out there on Christmas evening of all nights? I don't have any answers, and I probably never will. All I know is that I saw something that night that changed how I see the world, and I'll never forget the look in its eyes. That mix of hunger and sadness and something else I can't quite name. It stuck with me, and I doubt I'll ever be able to explain it. Story 16. We'd been out for a few hours, walking through these cornfields near my uncle's property. The corn was already harvested in most spots, but there were still patches where the stalks stood tall, maybe 7 or 8 feet high, dried out and rustling in the breeze. It was around midnight, and we hadn't seen much action. The raccoons were laying low, probably because of the moon. Too much light for them to feel safe, I guess. So we decided to call it a night and start heading back to the truck, which was parked about a mile away down a dirt road. I remember feeling kind of disappointed because we'd been looking forward to this hunt all week. My brother was cracking jokes about how we were going to come back empty-handed. and the other two were just grumbling about the cold. The air had that sharp autumn chill that seeps into your bones, and I was bundled up in my old camo jacket, gloves, and a beanie, but I could still feel the cold on my face. The dogs were trotting ahead of us, their noses to the ground, but they seemed lazy, not picking up any scents. Then, out of nowhere, the dogs just bolted. 1 second they were moseying along, and the next they were tearing off into the cornfield to our left, barking like crazy. It wasn't their usual, "Hey, I found something," bark. It was this high-pitched, frantic sound that made the hair on my arms stand up. We all stopped dead in our tracks, listening. The barks got farther away, and then we heard these panicked yelps like the dogs were scared shitless. My brother shouted for them to come back, but they didn't listen. That's when the scream happened. I've heard a lot of sounds in the woods, coyotes, owls, even a bobcat once, but nothing like this. It was this blood-curdling scream that ripped through the silence, so loud and piercing it felt like it was inside my head. It came from the direction the dogs had run, deep in the cornfield, and it was moving fast, like whatever made it was charging right toward us. The sound was unlike anything I'd ever heard. Part animal, part human, all terror. It echoed in the still air, and I felt this cold dread wash over me. My heart was hammering against my ribs, and I could barely breathe. The other guys were yelling, trying to figure out what was going on, but I was frozen for a second. Then the scream got closer, and I realized it was heading straight for me. I was standing a bit apart from the group, near the edge of the cornfield, and before I could think, I started running. Not toward the others, but away, deeper into the corn stalks, because my stupid brain thought I could hide or something. The stalks were thick and tall, slapping against my face and arms as I pushed through them. I could hear the thing behind me, breaking through the corn like it was nothing. Snap, crack, snap, like someone was swinging a sledgehammer through the field. I was running as fast as I could, but it was gaining on me. My boots were slipping on the damp soil, and I could feel my lungs burning from the cold air. I glanced over my shoulder, but all I saw was darkness and the swaying stalks. The smell of dirt and decaying plants filled my nose, and I could taste the fear in my mouth, metallic and sour. The screaming kept coming, getting louder and more intense, and I knew I wasn't going to outrun it. My mind was racing. What the hell was it? A bear? But bears don't scream like that, and they don't move that fast through corn. Then I made the dumbest decision of my life. I stopped and turned around to face it. I don't know why I did it, maybe some primal instinct or just pure panic. I planted my feet, raised my rifle, but my hands were shaking so bad I couldn't even aim properly. The corn in front of me exploded, and this thing burst through. I only got a glimpse, but it's burned into my memory. It was huge, taller than a man, covered in dark, shaggy hair, and it had this deer slung over its shoulder like it was nothing. The deer was limp, its legs dangling, and I could see blood matted in its fur. The creature didn't even slow down. It slammed into me, knocking me flat on my back. The impact knocked the wind out of me, and I felt a sharp pain in my side where I hit the ground. For a second, I was just lying there, stunned, staring up at the moon through the broken stalks. The thing dropped the deer. It landed with a heavy thud right next to me, and then it was gone, vanished into the corn like it was never there. The screaming stopped, and everything went quiet, except for the sound of my own ragged breathing and the distant barks of the dogs, who were still going nuts somewhere. I lay there for what felt like forever, too scared to move. My body was trembling, and I could feel the cold ground seeping through my clothes. I kept expecting it to come back, but nothing happened. Eventually, I heard my brother and the others calling my name, their voices shaky. I managed to sit up, and I shouted back, my voice cracking. They found me a few minutes later, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. I must have looked like hell, covered in dirt, my jacket torn, and probably white as a ghost. I tried to tell them what happened, but the words came out in a jumble. There was something big with a deer. It screamed. My brother helped me up, and he kept asking if I was okay. but I could see the doubt in his eyes. The other two were just staring at me like I'd lost my mind. One of them, a guy named Rick, said maybe I'd tripped and hit my head, or maybe it was a bear that spooked me. But I knew what I saw and heard. That scream wasn't any bear. We gathered the dogs. They were cowering near the edge of the field, whining and trembling. Duke had a cut on his leg, probably from running through the corn, but otherwise they were okay, just scared. We decided to call the game warden, thinking maybe he'd know what it was. When he showed up, he listened to my story, but he just shook his head and said it was probably a coyote or a bobcat, and that the deer was likely roadkill or something. He didn't even bother looking around much, just told us to be careful and left. I felt so frustrated, like no one believed me. But the weirdest part was the deer. My brother and I decided to dress it out. Waste not, want not, right? So we dragged it back to the truck and started field dressing it under the headlights. That's when we saw the injuries. The deer's hip was shattered, and its backbone was broken in a way I'd never seen before. It wasn't from a car or a fall. It looked like something had grabbed it and twisted it with brute force. There were deep claw marks on its side, and the neck was snapped. I've dressed dozens of deer in my life, and this was different. Brutal, like it had been torn apart by something incredibly strong. We finished up and drove home in silence. No one talked much about it after that, but the teasing started soon after. My brother would joke about me seeing Bigfoot or something, and the other guys would laugh it off, but I couldn't shake it. For years, I'd wake up in a cold sweat, hearing that scream in my dreams. I stopped hunting at night, and I avoid cornfields to this day. What gets me the most is that moment, the scream, the crashing through the corn, and that split second when I saw it. I'll never forget the sheer size of it, the way it moved, and the feeling of being completely helpless. I still don't know what it was, and I probably never will, but that terror is stuck with me for life. Uday Segan Story 17. All right, I'm just gonna type this out. I've never told anyone the whole thing, not like this. Not with all the details. Writing it down makes it real in a way I'm not sure I can handle, but I can't keep carrying it around by myself anymore. This happened back in August of 1995. I was 24, thought I was invincible, thought I knew the mountains. I was wrong. I'd planned this trip for months. The San Juans in Colorado, specifically the Ice Lakes Basin. I'd seen pictures in a magazine. This insane, almost unreal turquoise water set against these jagged peaks. I wanted the solitude. My life in Denver was just noise. Traffic, my job, people everywhere. I craved quiet, real quiet. So I packed my gear, a decent external frame pack, a 3-season tent, a sleeping bag that was probably a little too light for the altitude, a knife, a headlamp, a camp stove, the usual stuff. I told my roommate I'd be back in 4 days and drove my beat-up Jeep Cherokee down to the trailhead near Silverton. The hike-in was a beast. It's steep, relentlessly steep, and the air gets thin fast. You feel it in your lungs, a kind of burning, and in your legs, like they're filled with wet sand. I remember the sound of my own breathing, loud in my ears, and the crunch of my boots on the rocky trail. That's all there was. No birds, no wind, just me and the climb. It took me most of the day to get up to the lower basin. By the time I found a spot I liked, the sun was starting to dip behind the peaks, casting long, cold shadows. I set up camp in a small clearing, nestled between some giant car-sized boulders. It felt protected, like a little fortress. The ground was uneven, all rocks and tufts of tough grass, and it took me a while to find a patch flat enough for my tent. I remember the smell of the pine trees, that crisp, clean scent, and the incredible, almost overwhelming silence. It was the quiet I'd wanted, but as the sun disappeared, it started to feel heavy, oppressive. I cooked a dehydrated meal on my little stove, the hiss of the gas, the only significant sound for what felt like hours. I ate quickly, the food tasteless, my appetite gone. I just wanted to get in the tent. I zipped myself into my sleeping bag, the nylon of the tent wall right next to my face. It was cold, the kind of cold that seeps into your bones. I fell into a fitful sleep, the kind where you're not really sure if you're asleep or just lying there with your eyes closed. Then a sound tore me awake. It wasn't a gradual waking up. It was like being doused with ice water. My eyes snapped open in the pitch black. My heart was immediately hammering against my ribs, a frantic, painful drumming. I held my breath, listening. Silence. Maybe I dreamed it, but my body knew better. Every muscle was wire-tight. Then it came again, a loud, sharp crack like a thick tree branch, no, like a small tree trunk being snapped in half. Not far away. Right outside the ring of boulders, the sound echoed through the basin, a flat, final report that seemed to suck all the other sound out of the world, and then the footsteps. Thump. A pause. 2 seconds, maybe 3. Thump. They were heavy. So heavy I could feel the vibration through the ground, a faint shudder that traveled up through the thin foam of my sleeping pad. This wasn't the skittering of a raccoon or the cautious tread of a deer. This was weight, massive, deliberate weight. They were circling my tent. I stopped breathing. I literally forgot how to breathe. I just lay there, frozen, my ears straining. Thump. Pause. Thump. It was moving slowly, methodically, a full circle around my little nylon shelter. I could track its progress by sound. It was behind me now, near the boulders. Then it was to my left, where the tree line started. Then in front of the tent flap. I curled into a ball, my knees to my chest, my hand fumbling for the hunting knife I kept sheathed next to my head. My fingers closed around the cold handle. It felt pathetically small. The footsteps stopped, right outside the tent. I could hear its breathing now, not panting like an animal. It was a low, deep rumbling sound, like air moving through a massive pipe. I could smell it too, a musky, earthy odor like damp soil and something else, something wild and old. I lay there for what felt like an eternity, knife gripped so tight my hand ached, waiting for the nylon to rip, for a hand or a paw or whatever it was to reach in and grab me. I was crying, I think. Silent, terrified tears that soaked into the sleeve of my jacket. This wasn't a bear. I've been around bears. They're curious, they're loud, they rustle and snuffle. This was different. This thing was aware. It knew I was in here. It was just waiting. After an age, the footsteps started again. Thump. Pause. Thump. Moving away, back towards the tree line. The sound faded, and eventually the only thing I could hear was the blood roaring in my own ears. I didn't move. I didn't sleep. I just stared into the darkness, clutching my knife, until the first faint hint of grey light began to filter through the tent fabric. The second the world was light enough to see, I unzipped the tent flap and crawled out. My body stiff and trembling. The air was bitingly cold. My eyes went straight to the ground around my tent. And there they were. Footprints. My brain just stuttered. They were enormous. I'm a size 11 boot, and I put my foot next to one of them. It was nearly double the length. I'm talking about 20 inches, easy. They were human-like, but not quite. The toes were splayed wide, and the arch was flatter than a human's. The stride, I tried to measure it by stepping between them. It was impossible. The distance between one print and the next was more than I could stretch, my own steps looking like a child's in comparison. A chill that had nothing to do with the morning cold locked my spine. This was what had been circling me all night. This was the source of that heavy, spaced-out thump. Panic set in, a clean, sharp survival panic. I didn't care about solitude anymore. I didn't care about the turquoise lakes. I needed to get out. I started shoving my gear into my pack, my hands shaking so badly I could barely roll my sleeping bag. I didn't bother with breakfast. I just needed to move. That's when I looked up at the sky. While I'd been paralyzed in my tent, the weather had turned. The sky, which had been a brilliant, cloudless blue the day before, was now a uniform, threatening grey. The temperature was dropping fast. I knew what that meant in the high country. Snow. I had a choice. Try to make the steep, exposed descent back to the trailhead now, in what was clearly about to be a whiteout, or find shelter and wait it out. My gut screamed to run, but my more rational, terrified mind knew that trying to navigate those switchbacks in a snowstorm was a death sentence. As the first few fat, wet flakes began to fall, I remembered something I'd seen on the map. An old mining cabin was marked not too far from the lower lake, maybe a half-mile from my camp. It was my only shot. I shouldered my pack, my legs feeling like jelly, and started hiking, not towards the trail down, but deeper into the basin, towards the cabin. The snow started in earnest, big, heavy flakes that quickly began to coat the ground, obscuring the terrifying footprints, which was somehow worse. It was like it was erasing the evidence, making my story impossible to prove. I found the cabin tucked into a fold in the terrain, a low, squat structure made of dark, weathered logs. The roof looked intact. The door was hanging off one leather hinge, but it was mostly closed. I pushed it open, the wood groaning in protest. It was one room, maybe 12 by 12 feet. Dark. It smelled of dust, old wood, and the faint metallic tang of rust. There was a crude stone fireplace on one wall, a single grimy window, and a rough-hewn wooden bunk in the corner with a collapsed pile of what might have once been a mattress. It was shelter. It was solid. It felt 1,000 times safer than my flimsy tent. I got a small fire going in the fireplace, more for light and psychological comfort than heat. The snow was falling thick and fast now, a solid white curtain outside the door. I was trapped. I ate a protein bar, my stomach in too many knots for real food, and sat on the floor with my back against the wall, watching the fire. The adrenaline from the night was wearing off, leaving me drained and hollow. I must have dozed off. I woke up because of the smell. It hit me like a physical blow, so potent it made my eyes water. It was the smell of spoiled meat, of something long dead and rotting, mixed with the thick, pungent odor of wet, matted fur. It was the same smell from outside my tent, but 100 times stronger, concentrated in this small, enclosed space. My stomach lurched, and then I heard the breathing. It was coming from the far corner of the cabin, the one shrouded in the deepest shadow, away from the weak firelight. It was that same low, deep, rumbling sound I'd heard outside my tent, but slower now, more relaxed. It was already in here. It had been in here the whole time, waiting in the dark. Terror, pure and absolute, flooded every cell in my body. I couldn't move. I couldn't scream. I could only sit there, my back pressed against the rough logs, and listen to it breathe. I could feel the sound in my chest, a vibration that resonated with my own frantic heartbeat. My headlamp. It was on my head where I always kept it. My hand, trembling violently, crept up and fumbled for the switch. It felt like my fingers were made of wood. I found the rubber button. I took one last, shuddering breath of that foul air, and I clicked the light on. The beam, a stark white in the darkness, cut across the room and landed directly on the corner. And I saw the eyes, two of them, dull red like dying embers. They didn't shine, they glowed with a faint internal light. They were set wide apart, and they were fixed on me, unmoving. There was no shape around them, no body that I could make out. Just an impression of immense, shadowy bulk that swallowed the light from my headlamp. It was just there. Watching me, a wave of something washed over me then. It wasn't fear. The fear was still there, a background scream, but this was something else. It was a profound, irresistible drowsiness. It felt like I'd been drugged. My thoughts turned to sludge. My eyelids became impossibly heavy. My grip on consciousness just slipped. It was a gentle, almost peaceful surrender. The last thing I remember is the sight of those two dull red pinpricks in the darkness. and the deep, rhythmic sound of its breathing filling my ears. I woke up with a jolt. Daylight. Bright, cold daylight was streaming through the dirty window. The fire was out, nothing but grey ash. The cabin was silent. The smell was gone. I was still sitting against the wall, my headlamp askew on my forehead. For a second, I thought I'd dreamed it. The whole thing, the footsteps, the eyes, the smell. It had to be a nightmare, a horrible, vivid nightmare brought on by altitude and isolation. I stood up, my body aching and stiff. I needed air. I needed to see the sky. I walked to the door and pushed it open. The world was buried under a foot of fresh, pristine snow. It was beautiful and silent, and there, right in front of the cabin door, clear as day in the white powder, was a single footprint. It was even bigger than the ones I'd seen by my tent, over 20 inches long. The details were perfect, the splayed toes, the deep impression of a massive heel. It was fresh. It had been made after the snow had stopped falling. It had stood right here. It had looked at the door, and then it had walked away. I didn't even pack my things from inside the cabin. I just grabbed my pack, which was still by the door, and I started running. I didn't look back. I post-holed through the deep snow, falling, getting up, falling again, driven by a blind, primal need to be gone. I made it down to Silverton in a haze, my clothes soaked, my face numb. I got in my Jeep and I drove, and I didn't stop until I was back in Denver. I never went back. I never told my roommate why I came back early. I just said the weather turned bad. It was the truth, but not the whole truth. The whole truth is that I shared a cabin with something that night, something that left a footprint in the snow to let me know it was real, something with eyes that glowed like old coals, and a presence that could put you to sleep just by being near you. I don't know what it was, I don't want to know, but I know the mountains keep secrets, and sometimes you stumble into one, and it sees you. Story 18. All right. I'm just going to type this out. I've never posted anything like this before, but I've been reading this forum for a while, and I guess I finally have a reason to post. I need to get this out. This happened to me, and I don't care if people believe me or not. I just have to tell someone who might understand. I live in Forest City, North Carolina. It's a small town, you know, the kind where everyone knows everyone, and not much happens. I work about a 20-minute drive from my house, and my route home takes me along this winding road that follows the Linville River for a little while. It's a pretty drive, especially in the fall. This was one November afternoon. I'd left work a little early, so it was about 3:30. The sky was that kind of pale, washed-out grey it gets in late autumn, and there was a chill in the air that made you glad you had the car heater on. I was just driving, not really thinking about anything. My mind was on what I was going to make for dinner, whether I remembered to take the trash out that morning, just normal stuff. The radio was playing some old country song, low. I came around a bend, and the Linville River Bridge was up ahead. It's not a big bridge, just a single lane in each direction, maybe 100 feet long, crossing over a wide, shallow part of the river. The water was low that time of year, mostly just rocky shallows with a few deeper channels. I don't know why I did it, but as I got onto the bridge, I slowed down. I do that sometimes just to look at the water. The view from the bridge is nice. You can see a good stretch of the river in both directions, so I took my foot off the gas and let the car coast, just looking out the driver's side window at the river, and that's when I saw it. About 100 feet away, right in the middle of the river, standing in the shallow water, was this figure. My first thought, the one that lasts for half a second, was bear. We have black bears around here. It's not unheard of to see one, but that thought just evaporated. It was wrong, all wrong. I hit the brakes, not a slam, but a firm, hard press. The car jerked a little as it slowed down fast. My heart gave a single, hard thump against my ribs. The thing was just standing there, facing mostly away from me, looking upstream. It was big, really big, and it was a dark color, like a wet chestnut, a deep, rich brown. The hair or fur or whatever it was looked shorter than a bear's, cleaner somehow, not shaggy or matted. It was just covered. Then it turned its head. It turned its head towards me. Not its whole body, just its head over its shoulder, and that's when I got a clear view for maybe 5, maybe 8 seconds. It felt like an hour. It didn't have a bear's face at all. No snout, no pointed ears. Its head was kind of egg-shaped, but not in a cartoon way. It was just rounder on top, tapering a little towards the jaw. The face was dark, like leather, and it seemed flat. I couldn't see any ears. Its body was massive. It had to be over 7 feet tall, easy. Its shoulders were huge, and its arms were so long they were just hanging down by its sides. And its hands, I couldn't see its hands clearly, but its arms hung down past its knees. It was built like a man, a huge, powerful man, but the proportions were off. The torso was thick, the legs were powerful looking, but those arms, they were just so long. It was just standing in the water, which was maybe up to its mid-calves. It wasn't moving. It was just looking at me, and then our eyes met. I felt it. It was a physical sensation, like a chill that started at the base of my spine and just shot up through my whole body. My skin prickled all over, and the hairs on my arms stood up. My mouth went completely dry. This wasn't a bear. This wasn't anything I had ever seen or even imagined. This was something else. Something that wasn't supposed to be real. The terror wasn't a scream. It was this cold, heavy weight that just settled in my gut. It was the absolute certainty that I was looking at something I was not meant to see. My brain was screaming, "Sasquatch." The word just popped into my head, fully formed, and it stuck there. I didn't want it to be true, but I knew it was. I knew it with every fiber of my being. My car had slowed to almost a complete stop right in the middle of the bridge. I was just frozen, my hands glued to the steering wheel at 10 and 2, my foot still on the brake. I couldn't look away. Its eyes, I don't even know what color they were, dark. But they were intelligent. There was an awareness there, a consciousness that was looking back at me, assessing me. It wasn't the blank stare of an animal. It was knowing. We just stayed like that, locked in that stare for those few endless seconds. The only sound was the hum of my car's engine and the faint rush of the river below. I remember my knuckles were white on the wheel. I remember the way the grey light from the overcast sky reflected dully off its dark, wet-looking hair. I remember the sheer bulk of it, the way it dominated the space in the river. It was so still. It didn't seem to be breathing hard or panting. It was just a statue, a terrifying living statue staring right into my soul. Then it moved. It didn't run. It didn't make a sound. It just turned its head back, facing upstream again, and took a step. A single, deliberate step. Then another. It moved behind the concrete embankment at the end of the bridge. It just walked with this easy, powerful gait and disappeared behind the abutment. The spell broke. I gasped. I actually gasped for air like I'd been holding my breath the whole time. My heart was hammering in my chest, a frantic, panicked rhythm. I had to see. I had to know where it went. I stomped on the gas pedal and my car lurched forward. I drove the last 20 feet off the bridge and immediately pulled over onto the gravel shoulder, my tires crunching loudly. I threw the car into park and practically launched myself out of the driver's seat. My legs felt like jelly. I stumbled a little on the gravel, grabbing the hot hood of my car to steady myself. The air was cold and it felt sharp in my lungs. I ran to the edge of the road, right where the bridge ended, and I looked. I scanned the river, up and down, my eyes darting everywhere. There was nothing. The river was empty, just water flowing over rocks. A few bare trees on the far bank, the grey sky. Nothing. It was gone. It had just vanished. There was no place for it to hide. The embankment it walked behind was just a short, sloping wall of concrete. Beyond it was an open, rocky riverbank for 50 yards in either direction. There were no trees thick enough to hide something that size within 100 feet. It couldn't have climbed the steep bank that fast. It couldn't have just melted into the woods without me seeing it. It was impossible. I stood there for what felt like 10 minutes, just staring, my breath making little clouds in the cold air. I was shaking, not from the cold, but from this deep, primal fear that was still coursing through me. My mind was racing, trying to process it, trying to find any other explanation. A man in a fur suit at 3:30 on a Tuesday afternoon, standing in the middle of the Linville River? No. No way. The size was all wrong. The proportions were all wrong. The way it moved was all wrong. It was just gone. I finally got back in my car. My hands were trembling so bad I had a hard time getting the key in the ignition. I just sat there for a minute, staring straight ahead through the windshield. The heater was still blowing, but I felt cold all the way through. I kept glancing in my rearview mirror, half expecting to see it standing on the road behind me. Nothing. I drove the rest of the way home in a complete daze. I don't even remember the drive. My mind was just replaying those few seconds over and over and over. The dark chestnut color, the egg-shaped head, the long arms, the way it turned its head, the eyes. I got home and I just sat in my driveway for another 5 minutes. I walked into my house and my dog was there, wagging his tail like usual, and I just patted his head and went straight to the kitchen sink and splashed cold water on my face. I looked at myself in the little mirror above the sink. I looked pale. My eyes were wide. I looked scared. I didn't tell anyone that night. What was I supposed to say? Hey, honey, I think I saw Bigfoot on the way home from work. I just couldn't form the words. It sounded insane, even in my own head, but I know what I saw. I'm a practical guy. I fix things for a living. I'm not given to flights of fancy. I don't believe in ghosts or aliens or any of that. But I believe in what I saw that November afternoon. I encountered a Sasquatch. There's no other explanation that fits. The image is burned into my brain. The feeling of those eyes on me, the chill that locked my joints, the sheer impossible size of the thing. It was real. And sometimes when I'm driving home late and I cross that bridge, I still slow down, just a little, and I look out at the river, and I wonder. Story 19. Okay, so this happened back in August of 2006. I'm just going to write it all out. I've never posted anything like this before, but I've been reading stories on here for a while, and I figured maybe typing it out will help. I don't know. I still don't have an explanation for it. None of us do. It's just this thing that sits in the back of my mind, this cold, hard knot of fear that I can feel even now, years later, just thinking about it. We'd been out near Port Renfrew, me, my stepson, and his girlfriend. We'd spent the day fishing and crabbing. It was a good day, the kind of day you remember for all the right reasons. The sun was out, the water was calm, we'd caught a few decent-sized Dungeness crabs and a couple of rockfish. The mood was light, you know? Easy. We were tired, but in that good, satisfied way after a long day outside. We'd packed up the boat, got it secured on the trailer, and started heading back. It was getting dark, that deep, purplish kind of dark that settles over the back roads of Vancouver Island. The trees just swallow the light. We'd only been driving for maybe 10-15 minutes when I pulled over. My stepson needed to take a leak, and I wanted to do a quick check on the trailer lights and the tie-downs. You always double-check that stuff, especially on these winding, bumpy logging roads. It's just habit, so we stopped. The truck was idling, and the headlights were cutting two bright tunnels through the absolute blackness. I got out, walked around the back. The trailer lights were all working. Red running lights, brake lights, turn signals. Good. I gave the straps a good, hard tug. I remember the feel of the thick nylon in my hands, the cold metal of the buckles. Everything was tight. The safety chain was hooked up. The latch was secure. I remember looking at the boat, a solid 17-foot aluminum boat, just sitting there on the trailer, everything looking perfectly normal. I even kicked the tires for good measure. They were fine. I got back in the truck. My stepson was already in the passenger seat, his girlfriend in the back. "All good?" he asked. "Yep, all good," I said, and I put the truck in drive and pulled back onto the road. We drove maybe 250 meters, not even a full minute. The road curved gently to the left. It was then that my stepson started fiddling with the CD player. We had one of those old multi-disc changers in the center console. "Hey, can you stop for a sec? This CD is skipping," he said. "Sure," I said. It was a quiet road, no one around for miles. I eased the truck to a stop, right in the middle of the lane. I put it in park. I kept my foot on the brake pedal, just out of habit. The interior dome light came on when I'd stopped, casting this weak yellowish glow inside the cab. I remember it made it harder to see outside, reflecting off the windshield. He was leaning over, digging through the CD case. His girlfriend was looking out her window, into the wall of trees. Everything was quiet, just the low hum of the truck's engine, the faint sound of a CD case rattling. Then it started. It wasn't a sound at first, it was a feeling, a deep, shuddering jolt that went through the whole truck. It was so violent and sudden that my head snapped back against the headrest. My stepson yelled, "What the hell?" He thought we were rolling, that I'd taken my foot off the brake or something, but my foot was planted hard on the brake pedal. The truck was in park. I could feel the transmission shuddering through the gear shift. My hands were clenched on the steering wheel, my knuckles instantly white, and then the truck started to lurch. Not forward or backward, sideways, to the passenger side. It was a sickening, rocking motion, like something massive was shoving us from the driver's side. The whole vehicle was tilting. The suspension groaned in a way I'd never heard before. A metal-on-metal shriek of protest. "Are we rolling?" my stepson shouted again, his voice pitched high with panic. He was bracing himself against the dashboard. I just stared straight ahead, my brain refusing to process what was happening. My foot was jammed so hard on the brake, I thought I'd push it through the floor. We weren't moving forward, but we were being moved. The truck was rocking back and forth, side to side, like a toy in a giant's hand. That's when his girlfriend screamed, not a yell, a full-on blood-curdling scream from the back seat. "The boat!" she shrieked. "Something's pushing the boat!" I snapped my head to look in the side mirror. The interior light was still on, making it a dim, ghostly reflection, but I could see it. The trailer with the boat on it was being shoved violently toward the edge of the road. It was tilting at a crazy angle, the wheels on the passenger side lifting off the pavement. It wasn't a gentle push. It was a series of powerful, jarring shoves, and there was nothing there. I mean, nothing. No other vehicle. No fallen tree. No animal. Just the dark, empty road behind us and the black outline of the trees. But the trailer was moving, being forced sideways as if by an invisible bulldozer. The feeling inside the cab was indescribable. It was pure, primal terror. This wasn't a mechanical failure. This wasn't an earthquake. The ground wasn't shaking, just the truck. This was a force, an intelligence. Something was out there in the dark, and it was attacking us. It was trying to push us, a full-size pickup truck and a heavy boat trailer, right off the road and into the ditch. The noise was overwhelming. The truck was rocking so hard the doors were rattling. The boat was grinding and creaking against its straps. My stepson was yelling, his girlfriend was sobbing and screaming, and I was just frozen for a second, my heart hammering in my throat so hard I couldn't breathe. I could smell it too. A sudden, sharp smell of fear sweat filled the cab, and something else, something that came in through the air vents for just a second, a smell like rotten meat and wet, heavy fur. It was thick and foul, and it made my stomach turn. My survival instinct kicked in. The only thought in my head was, "Get out of here." I didn't think about what it was. I didn't care. I just knew we had to be somewhere else. I slammed my foot down on the gas pedal. The engine roared. The tires, which had been held in place by the brake, screeched as they fought against the force. For a horrifying second, nothing happened. It felt like the invisible thing was holding us there, resisting the engine's power. Then, with a final sickening lurch that made the whole frame of the truck shudder, we surged forward. The movement was jarring. The violent rocking stopped the second we started moving. It was like we'd broken through some kind of barrier. The sudden silence, apart from the roaring engine and the sobbing from the back seat, was almost as terrifying as the attack itself. I didn't let up on the gas. I sped down that dark road, my hands shaking so badly I could barely keep the truck straight. I kept checking the rearview mirror, expecting to see something, anything chasing us. But there was only darkness. My stepson was twisted around in his seat, staring out the back window, his face pale and slick with sweat. "Did you see anything? Anything at all?" I asked, my voice a ragged croak. "Nothing," he said, his voice trembling. There was nothing there. His girlfriend just cried, curled up in the back seat. We didn't speak after that. What was there to say? We just drove. The three of us trapped in this bubble of sheer, undiluted terror. Every shadow between the trees looked like a moving shape. Every bump in the road made my heart leap into my throat. I drove for what felt like an eternity, but it was probably only another 10 minutes before we saw the lights of a small campsite up ahead. I pulled in, drove right up to the brightest area near the camp host's trailer, and killed the engine. We just sat there for a long time, nobody saying a word. The only sound was our ragged breathing. I could feel the adrenaline crashing, leaving me weak and trembling. My shirt was soaked through with cold sweat. We were safe, surrounded by other people, other vehicles. But the fear didn't leave. It had settled deep inside us, a permanent chill. We were too scared to get out and look at the trailer. We just locked the doors and spent the night right there in the truck. None of us slept. Every little night sound, a twig snapping, an owl hooting, made us jump. We just stared out into the darkness, waiting for the sun to come up. The next morning, in the clear grey light of dawn, I finally got the nerve to inspect the damage. I walked around to the back of the truck, my stomach in a tight knot. My stepson came with me, his face still grim. The boat was sitting crooked on the trailer, not by a lot, but enough to notice. I looked at the safety chain first. The latch itself, a solid piece of forged steel, wasn't broken, but the metal loop it hooks onto was stretched. It was bent out of shape, like someone had taken a massive pry bar and just levered it open. The metal was distorted. That's not something that happens from normal driving or even a bad pothole. Then I looked at the nylon safety cable. It's a thick braided cable, meant as a final backup if the hitch fails. It was frayed. Not worn, but frayed, like it had been stretched to its absolute limit, and then some of the strands had just snapped under the tension. But the worst was the tie-down straps. There were two of them, heavy-duty 1-inch wide nylon straps with metal cam buckles. They're what hold the boat tight to the trailer. They were torn, not cut-torn. The nylon was ripped apart, the fibers shredded and frayed. It looked like something with immense strength had just grabbed the boat and tried to rip it right off the trailer. The buckles were twisted and bent. I walked over to the edge of the road where it had happened. The pavement was fine, no cracks, no skid marks from us besides the ones I'd made when I floored it. The gravel shoulder was undisturbed, no giant footprints, no claw marks from a bear. Nothing. It was just a normal stretch of road in the morning light. That was the most chilling part, the complete lack of evidence. No logical explanation. A bear couldn't have done that. A bear is strong, but it couldn't rock a several-ton vehicle like that. It couldn't stretch steel and tear nylon straps. An earthquake would have affected the ground, not just our truck. There was no wind, no other cars. It was something else, something we never saw, something that came out of the ancient deep woods of Vancouver Island with a power I can't comprehend, shook us like a doll, tried to push us off the road, and then vanished back into the silence. We drove home that day in complete silence. We've talked about it maybe a handful of times since. We all agree on what happened. We all remember the feeling of being utterly helpless, of being at the mercy of something we couldn't see or understand. I still go fishing. I still drive those roads, but I never ever pull over after dark, not for anything. And every time I hook up my boat, my hands shake a little as I check the straps, and I feel that cold knot of fear tighten in my gut, remembering the day something invisible tried to kill us on a deserted road and left us with no explanation at all.